Have you ever wondered what happens in office buildings after everyone goes home? 2 months ago, I thought the answer was simple. Cleaners like me come in, empty the bins, hoover the carpets, and lock up. Now I'm sitting in a McDonald's car park in Birmingham at 3 in the morning, knowing that in roughly 18 hours, thousands of people on the dark web are going to watch me become the entertainment in a red room broadcast that I've been unknowingly preparing for weeks. I work for a commercial cleaning company called Spotless Solutions. We handle office buildings, retail spaces, and industrial sites across the West Midlands. It's night shift work, starting after business hours, finishing before the morning staff arrive. The pay isn't brilliant, but it's steady employment and the work is straightforward enough. Empty bins, clean toilets, vacuum floors, wipe down surfaces. Nothing complicated. 3 months ago, I was assigned to a new contract, a small office building in Solihull that housed various tech companies and startups. The building was modern, well maintained, and generally easier to clean than some of the older properties on my usual route. Most importantly, it paid better than average because the client had specific requirements about discretion and security. The building manager who showed me around was a woman called Sarah Chen. She explained that several of the companies working there dealt with sensitive projects and required enhanced security protocols. This meant signing additional confidentiality agreements, undergoing background checks, and following strict procedures about which areas I could access and when. Sarah was professional but friendly, taking time to explain the building's layout and the specific cleaning requirements for different areas. Some offices needed daily attention, others were cleaned weekly, and a few were marked as restricted access, requiring special permission and supervision to enter. The restrictions seemed reasonable for a building housing technology companies. The work itself was routine for the first few weeks. I'd arrive at 9:30, work through my assigned areas methodically, and finish by around 2 in the morning. The building was usually empty, except for the occasional programmer or designer working late, but they kept to themselves, and I kept to my cleaning schedule. About a month into the contract, Sarah started asking me to take on additional tasks beyond standard cleaning. Moving furniture in certain offices, rearranging equipment, testing that various devices were properly connected to power supplies. She offered overtime rates for this extra work, which I welcomed given my financial situation. The additional tasks were always in the basement level of the building, which housed what Sarah described as a media production company. The space had been fitted out with professional lighting equipment, multiple camera setups, and sophisticated computer systems that required careful handling during cleaning. Sarah explained that the production company created content for online platforms and needed their equipment maintained in specific configurations. This meant I couldn't just clean around things. I needed to understand how the setup worked so I could clean thoroughly without disrupting their technical arrangements. The basement studio was impressive, but oddly sterile. Professional cameras positioned at various angles around a central area that could be reconfigured for different types of filming. Lighting rigs that could create various moods and effects. Computer workstations with multiple monitors showing editing software and streaming interfaces. What struck me as unusual was how clinical the space felt. Most media studios I'd seen on television or in films had a creative, lived-in atmosphere. This felt more like a medical facility or laboratory. Everything precisely positioned. Surfaces that could be easily sanitized. Drainage systems that seemed designed for more than just normal cleaning needs. Sarah began training me to operate some of the equipment as part of my cleaning routine. Not for production purposes, she assured me, but so I could test that everything was functioning properly after cleaning sessions. turn cameras on and off, adjust lighting levels, verify that recording systems were operational. Basic maintenance tasks that would help the production team prepare for their work. During these training sessions, Sarah would have me stand in various positions around the studio while she operated the equipment from the control area. She claimed this was necessary to test camera angles and lighting configurations, ensuring that the technical setup would work properly for the production team's projects. I found myself spending increasing amounts of time in the basement studio, learning to operate more sophisticated equipment and taking on responsibilities that seemed beyond normal cleaning duties. Sarah always had reasonable explanations. The production company paid premium rates for comprehensive maintenance, and my technical aptitude made me valuable for tasks beyond basic janitorial work. Around this time, I started noticing that the building's internet usage was unusually heavy during my cleaning shifts. Wi-Fi speeds would slow dramatically, sometimes to the point where my phone couldn't connect properly. When I mentioned this to Sarah, she explained that the production company often uploaded large video files during off-peak hours to take advantage of better bandwidth. I also began finding evidence of recent activity in areas that were supposed to be empty during my shifts. Chairs moved, equipment that had been repositioned, cleaning supplies that showed signs of recent use. When I asked Sarah about this, she mentioned that some of the companies had staff who worked very late or came in during unusual hours to avoid disruptions. The basement studio started requiring more frequent and thorough cleaning. Sarah explained that the production company had increased their output and needed more rigorous sanitation between filming sessions. This meant using industrial-strength cleaning products, sanitizing all surfaces, and ensuring that the space was completely sterile before each use. One night, while cleaning the basement studio more thoroughly than usual, I discovered equipment I hadn't seen before. Medical devices, restraint systems, and items that clearly weren't related to normal video production. When I asked Sarah about these additions, she explained that the production company had expanded into educational content about medical procedures and safety training. Sarah also began asking me to test new aspects of the studio setup, verify that restraint systems were properly secured, check that medical monitoring equipment was functioning correctly, ensure that various tools and devices were clean and ready for use. She framed these tasks as quality control for educational content production. The requests became more specific and frequent. Sarah needed me to test the studio's soundproofing by making noise at various volumes while she monitored from the control room. Verify that the ventilation system could handle different types of atmospheric conditions. Check that the drainage systems could manage various types of liquid waste. About 3 weeks ago, Sarah introduced me to what she called the final testing phase of my training. This involved me spending time in the central area of the studio while she operated all the equipment simultaneously: cameras, lighting, recording systems, and monitoring devices. She claimed this comprehensive test was necessary to verify that the entire setup worked correctly for the production company's most demanding projects. During these sessions, Sarah would give me detailed instructions about positioning, movement, and responses to various stimuli she introduced through the studio's technical systems. Follow scripted scenarios, react to different sensory inputs, demonstrate how someone might respond to unexpected situations. She said this testing helped ensure that the studio could handle any type of educational content. The testing became increasingly intense and realistic. Sarah would simulate various emergency scenarios, test my responses to stress situations, and document my reactions to different types of physical and psychological pressure. She assured me this was all part of preparing the studio for realistic safety training content. Last week, everything became clear in the most horrifying way possible. I was conducting what Sarah had described as a final comprehensive test when I noticed that the computer monitors in the control room were showing more than just local recording interfaces. Multiple screens displayed what appeared to be dark web streaming platforms with viewer counts showing thousands of people watching live feeds. Sarah's production company wasn't creating educational content. It was broadcasting live torture and murder to paying audiences on the dark web. The basement studio was a red room, and I had been unknowingly preparing it for operation while gradually being trained to become its next victim. The weeks of testing had been conditioning sessions, documenting my responses to various situations and building anticipation among dark web viewers who had been following my story. My cleaning duties had been gradually transformed into preparation for my own broadcast, with each session bringing me closer to becoming content rather than maintenance staff. Sarah dropped all pretense of reasonable explanations when she realized I understood what was happening. She calmly explained that commercial cleaning provided perfect cover for red room operations. Cleaners work alone, have access to private spaces, and are expected to maintain discretion about what they observe. The enhanced security protocols, confidentiality agreements, and restricted access areas weren't about protecting technology companies. They were about maintaining operational security for dark web broadcasting. The basement studio had been designed specifically for creating authentic content using unwitting participants who thought they were just doing their jobs. My training sessions had been broadcast live to dark web audiences who paid premium rates to watch someone gradually discover their situation. The comprehensive testing, scenario simulations, and documented responses had all been content creation, building toward tomorrow night's final broadcast. I managed to escape while Sarah was distracted with technical preparations, but I know the surveillance network extends throughout the building and beyond. They've been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements, and building detailed profiles of my personal life during the months I worked there. Since leaving Solihull, I've been moving between different locations, but they keep finding me. Messages sent to devices I thought were secure. People who seem to recognize me despite my using different names. Evidence that my movements are being tracked and reported back to Sarah's operation. This morning, I received a package at the hotel where I'd been staying. A package containing cleaning supplies and a note explaining that tomorrow night's broadcast would feature the conclusion of the Cleaner series. Sarah's audience had been following my story from the beginning, watching me unknowingly prepare the very equipment that would be used for my final performance. The note included detailed information about my movements over the past week, demonstrating that their surveillance had continued despite my leaving the building. They knew which buses I'd taken, where I'd been staying, even what I'd bought from various shops. Every step of my escape had been monitored and possibly broadcast to paying audiences. I could go to the police, but Sarah has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in her dark web activities. Surveillance footage of me operating cameras, testing equipment, and following her instructions could be edited to support a narrative of voluntary cooperation rather than unknowing assistance. Spotless Solutions would have records of my assignment to the building, my regular presence there, and my involvement in technical tasks beyond normal cleaning duties. Without context, my actions would appear to show someone knowingly participating in the preparation of illegal streaming equipment. Sarah's operation is too sophisticated, too well established, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The commercial cleaning cover provides perfect legitimacy. Who would suspect a janitorial service of facilitating dark web red rooms? Tomorrow night, Thousands of people will watch the conclusion of the Cleaner series. They've paid to see someone whose job involves maintaining spaces become the victim of the very space they maintained. The irony is part of what makes the content valuable to Sarah's audience. I'm writing this from a McDonald's car park because it's one of the few places with 24-hour lighting and regular security patrols. But I know they're still watching somehow. The cleaning supplies in this morning's package included a note with details about this location, suggesting their monitoring capabilities extend far beyond the office building. In approximately 18 hours, I'll have to decide whether to show up at the address they provided or continue running. But Sarah has demonstrated that her network can find me anywhere, and her audience has been promised a conclusion to my story. The most terrifying realization is that Sarah's operation probably targets multiple cleaning staff simultaneously. How many other people might be unknowingly preparing equipment for their own final broadcasts? How many commercial cleaning contracts might be cover for dark web activities? The cleaning industry provides perfect access to private spaces during off hours, with workers who are isolated, poorly paid, and expected to maintain discretion about what they observe. It's an ideal setup for exploitation by people who understand how to gradually transform routine work into participation in something much darker. Sarah's technical expertise allows her to maintain sophisticated surveillance and streaming operations while using commercial cleaning as cover. Her business credentials provide legitimacy. Her security requirements deflect suspicion, and her resources allow her to maintain complex technical infrastructure. Tomorrow's broadcast is being promoted as authentic content, featuring genuine reactions from someone who doesn't understand what's happening until it's too late. Sarah's audience values realism over performance, preferring to watch real people discover their situation in real time. I never thought commercial cleaning could lead to this kind of danger. I thought the biggest risks were chemical exposure or workplace injuries. I never imagined that maintaining an office building could lead to becoming the star of my own murder broadcast. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so terrifying. I spent months cleaning and maintaining the very equipment that's going to be used to kill me. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled The Final Clean. Sarah's audience is expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, and real consequences for someone who thought she was just doing her job. The cleaner becomes the one who needs cleaning up after, and there's no one left to empty that particular bin. Have you ever had that moment when you realize you've been watching someone die and you can't tell if it's real or fake? That sick feeling in your stomach when you suddenly understand that what you thought was just morbid curiosity has turned you into something you never wanted to be. 6 weeks ago, I thought the most dangerous thing about the internet was accidentally clicking on spoilers for my favorite series. The film that started everything was called The Deep Web, or something equally dramatic. It was one of those low-budget thrillers that Netflix suggests when you've watched everything decent. The plot was about a journalist investigating online crime networks and discovering live-streamed murders where viewers could pay to watch real people being tortured and killed. Classic horror film stuff, completely over the top. But it got me thinking about whether any of it was actually real. I'd heard whispers about the dark web at college, older students talking about how you could buy anything online if you knew where to look. Drugs, fake IDs, stolen credit card details. But live murder streams? That seemed like the sort of thing that only existed in films. Still, curiosity is a powerful thing when you're 16, and everything in your life feels predictable and boring. My older brother Tom had left his laptop behind when he moved out for university, and I'd been using it for coursework since mine broke. Tom was studying computer science, so his laptop was loaded with all sorts of software I didn't recognize. One evening, while procrastinating on a history essay, I started exploring the programs he'd installed. Most were incomprehensible programming tools, but one caught my attention, something that seemed designed for accessing hidden websites. I won't pretend I understood the technical details, but after some Googling and following online tutorials, I managed to access what people called the dark web. It wasn't as exciting as I'd expected. Most of it looked like outdated websites from the early 2000s, with basic layouts and clunky navigation. There were marketplaces selling illegal things, forums discussing topics I didn't want to read about, and lots of sites that seemed abandoned or fake. But after a few hours of browsing, I found something that made my heart race. A site advertising authentic experiences and real-time interactive content with view accounts that suggested thousands of people were accessing it. The layout was more professional than most dark web sites I'd seen, with slick graphics and detailed descriptions of upcoming events. The site was clearly advertising red rooms, live streams where viewers could watch real violence happen to real people. The descriptions were clinical and detached, discussing subjects and scenarios, as if they were describing a nature documentary. What disturbed me most was how organized it all seemed. This wasn't some amateur operation. It was a business with regular schedules, different pricing tiers, and customer reviews. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to see if these things were actually real, or just elaborate hoaxes designed to scam gullible people. I created an account using fake details and started lurking in the forums where users discussed upcoming broadcasts. The conversations were casual, almost mundane. People talking about their favorite performers and comparing the quality of different streaming services. Most discussions focused on something called verification, the process of proving that broadcasts were genuine rather than staged. Experienced users shared tips for spotting fake content and recommended verified streams that had been authenticated by the community. The level of detail was disturbing. People analyzing physiological responses, discussing the authenticity of fear reactions, comparing the realism of different scenarios. After several days of reading these forums, I was convinced that at least some of the content was real. The users were too knowledgeable, too specific in their discussions, too focused on distinguishing authentic material from performances. They were talking about genuine violence as if it were entertainment, rating different streams based on the authenticity of the victim's suffering. The turning point came when I received a private message from someone with an established account. They'd noticed I was new and offered to help me navigate the more exclusive areas of the site. They explained that the best content required invitation access and that they could sponsor my application if I was genuinely interested in authentic experiences. Against my better judgment, I accepted their offer. Within hours, I had access to areas of the site I hadn't known existed. Higher quality streams, more detailed victim profiles, and viewer interaction features that allowed audiences to influence what happened during broadcasts. The technology was sophisticated. Multi-camera angles, real-time chat systems, and payment processing that handled thousands of transactions simultaneously. I watched part of one stream before closing my laptop and being sick in the bathroom. What I saw was undeniably real. Genuine terror, authentic pain, actual violence happening to someone who wasn't acting. The chat was full of users requesting specific actions, discussing the victim's responses, and rating the stream's quality as if they were reviewing a restaurant. I should have stopped accessing the site immediately, should have deleted the browser and tried to forget what I'd seen. Instead, I found myself returning every few days, drawn by a combination of horror and fascination. I never participated in the chats or made requests, but I became a regular observer of something I knew was deeply wrong. The users began to recognize my account name. Some sent friendly messages welcoming me to the community and recommending their favorite streamers. Others shared tips for accessing even more exclusive content or invited me to private viewing groups. I was becoming integrated into a network of people who consumed real suffering as entertainment. About 3 weeks into my exploration of the site, I received a message that changed everything. Someone had noticed my viewing patterns and wanted to discuss a special opportunity. They explained that new viewers were sometimes selected for participation in broadcasts, transitioning from observer to subject based on their engagement with the community. The message included details about my browsing history, the streams I'd watched, and the forums I'd visited. They knew I was accessing the site from Croydon, that I was using my brother's laptop, and that I typically browsed late at night when my parents were asleep. The level of surveillance was terrifying. They'd been monitoring me without my knowledge. More disturbing was their explanation of how recruitment worked. They didn't kidnap random people off the street. Instead, they identified curious observers who had demonstrated interest in their content and gradually drew them into participation. People who had already compromised themselves by watching, who couldn't report what they'd seen without admitting their own involvement. The message concluded with an invitation to a special viewing event in London. They offered to pay for travel expenses and promised I'd get to see behind the scenes of a professional broadcast. They assured me it was just observational, a chance to understand how the productions worked, but something about the invitation felt like a trap. I ignored the message, but similar invitations kept arriving. Different users reaching out with variations of the same offer. Opportunities to attend live events, meet other community members, or tour production facilities. Each message demonstrated more detailed knowledge of my personal life, my college schedule, my part-time job at a local shop, my family's routines. 2 weeks ago, the messages became more insistent. Someone had accessed my social media accounts and was sending screenshots of my online activity, threatening to share my dark web browsing history with my parents, college, and friends, unless I accepted one of their invitations. They'd also found my real name, address, and mobile number despite my using fake details on the site. That's when I realized I wasn't just a viewer anymore. I was being groomed as a potential victim. The friendly welcome messages, the exclusive access, the gradual normalization of extreme content. It had all been designed to draw me deeper into their network until I became complicit enough to be vulnerable to coercion. I deleted everything from my brother's laptop, changed all my passwords, and tried to pretend none of it had happened. But the messages kept finding me on different platforms. Text messages to my phone, emails to accounts I'd never used for dark web access, even physical letters posted to my home address. All contained the same basic threat: participate willingly or face exposure of my viewing history. The most recent message arrived yesterday, delivered to the coffee shop where I work part-time. Someone had been watching me closely enough to know my schedule and workplace. The envelope contained photographs of me, taken without my knowledge over recent weeks, walking to college, leaving work, sitting in my bedroom at night. The accompanying note explained that my audition period was concluding and that I was expected to attend a filming session tomorrow evening. The location was an address in South London, along with detailed instructions about arrival times and what to bring. The note explained that my session would be broadcast live to the community members who'd been following my journey from curious observer to willing participant. They'd been documenting my gradual involvement, turning my exploration of their world into content for other viewers. I've been hiding in Brighton since receiving that message, but I know they'll find me again. They've demonstrated access to surveillance that goes far beyond what I thought possible. They know my habits, my routines, my vulnerabilities. They've been studying me for weeks, learning how to manipulate and control me. The most terrifying realization is that this was always the plan. The easy access to the site, the friendly welcome from established users, the gradual exposure to more extreme content, it was all designed to identify and recruit potential victims. The dark web red rooms don't just broadcast random violence, they cultivate their own supply of subjects from curious visitors who think they're just exploring. I keep thinking about how many other teenagers might be following the same path I did. How many young people, bored and curious about the stories they've heard, might be unknowingly walking into the same trap. The internet makes it so easy to access these spaces, to become involved without understanding the consequences. Tomorrow night, thousands of people on the dark web will expect to watch a live broadcast featuring the teenage girl who started as a curious observer and became the main attraction. They've been following my story, anticipating this conclusion, paying for access to see how my journey ends. I could go to the police, but what would I tell them? That I spend weeks voluntarily accessing illegal content on the dark web? That I watched real people being harmed and did nothing to help them? That I'm now being blackmailed to participate in the same activities I observed? Any investigation would expose my own actions and probably result in criminal charges. The people running these operations understand this dynamic perfectly. They create viewers who become complicit through observation, who can't seek help without incriminating themselves, who gradually transform from audience to content. It's a perfect system for generating both entertainment and victims. I'm writing this as a warning for anyone who might be tempted to explore these areas of the internet out of curiosity or boredom. The dark web red rooms aren't just urban legends or film plots. They're real, they're organized, and they're always looking for new content. What starts as innocent curiosity can quickly become something much darker. Tomorrow's broadcast is supposed to feature a special guest, a teenage girl from Croydon who thought she was just exploring the internet and ended up becoming the star of her own horror story. The viewers are expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, real consequences for someone who started as one of them. I don't know if I'll show up at that address tomorrow night or if I'll keep running. But I do know that somewhere in the depths of the dark web, people are waiting to watch whatever happens next. People who started as curious observers just like me, who gradually became consumers of real suffering, who now expect to see me transition from viewer to victim. The cycle continues, and curiosity remains the bait that draws in the next generation of participants. Sometimes the worst decisions really do start with boredom. Okay, so this is what happened to me, and I'm still not entirely sure how I ended up in this situation. 3 months ago, I was just a postgraduate student in Manchester, looking for someone to share the rent on a decent 2-bedroom flat near the university. Now I'm locked in a bathroom, in a Premier Inn somewhere outside Liverpool, and in roughly 12 hours, thousands of people are going to watch me die on a live stream that my flatmate has been preparing for weeks. I should probably start from the beginning. I'm 23, studying for a master's degree in social work in Manchester. The course is demanding but rewarding. We spend a lot of time discussing vulnerable populations and how to protect people from exploitation. The irony of my current situation isn't lost on me. Finding affordable accommodation in Manchester is nearly impossible on a student budget, so when I saw an advert for someone looking to share a spacious flat in Didsbury, I jumped at the chance. The rent was reasonable, the location was perfect, and the flatmate seemed normal enough based on our brief text exchanges. Her name was Emma. She worked from home doing something with computers, and she preferred a quiet environment for studying and working. Emma was in her late 20s, softly spoken and obsessively tidy. She kept strange hours, often up all night working, sleeping during the day. But she was respectful about noise levels and always paid her share of bills on time. She'd converted the larger bedroom into both a sleeping area and an elaborate home office setup with multiple monitors, professional lighting equipment, and what appeared to be streaming gear. When I asked about her work, Emma explained that she created content for online platforms. She was deliberately vague about the specifics, mentioning something about niche audiences and specialized streaming services. I assumed she was doing gaming content or tutorials. Lots of people make decent money creating online content these days, and her equipment certainly looked professional enough. Emma rarely had visitors, rarely went out during normal hours, and seemed to live entirely online. She ordered everything for delivery, groceries, meals, even basic household items. The only times I saw her leave the flat were for brief walks at odd hours, usually very late at night or very early in the morning. She seemed almost allergic to natural daylight. About a month after moving in, I started noticing some odd things about Emma's routine. She would receive packages almost daily, not just normal deliveries, but items that required signature confirmation and seemed unusually heavy or bulky. When I asked about them casually, she explained that her work required specialized equipment that needed regular updates or replacements. The packages often arrived when I was at university, but occasionally I'd be home to sign for them. Medical supplies, plastic sheeting, industrial cleaning products, and items I couldn't identify wrapped in unmarked packaging. When I mentioned that some of the delivery content seemed unusual, Emma became defensive and explained that her content creation required props and materials that might seem strange to people unfamiliar with her industry. I also started noticing sounds from Emma's room at night, not just typing or video calls, but movement of heavy objects, occasional thuds that suggested furniture being rearranged, and what sounded like construction or assembly work. When I asked about the noise, she apologized and explained that she was upgrading her studio setup for better production quality. Around this time, Emma started asking me personal questions that seemed oddly specific. Details about my course schedule, when I'd be home or away, whether I had family visiting, if I was dating anyone seriously. She framed these as normal flatmate conversations, but something about her interest felt intrusive rather than friendly. She also began showing unusual interest in my social work studies, particularly the modules dealing with vulnerable populations and crisis intervention. Emma would ask detailed questions about what we learned in lectures, how we identified at-risk individuals, and what protocols we followed when someone was in immediate danger. I assumed she was just curious about my studies. One evening, while Emma was out on one of her rare excursions, I heard sounds coming from her room despite knowing she wasn't home. Thinking we might have an intruder, I carefully checked her door and found it unlocked. Inside, her computer setup was more extensive than I'd realized. Multiple monitors showing different websites, several cameras positioned around the room, and equipment I didn't recognize, but that looked expensive and professional. What disturbed me most was seeing my own image on one of the monitors. It appeared to be a live feed from a camera positioned somewhere in the common areas of our flat, showing the kitchen and living room from an angle that would capture anyone moving through the space. Emma had been recording the shared areas of our home without telling me. I confronted her about the surveillance when she returned, but Emma had a reasonable explanation ready. She claimed that she'd installed security cameras after some break-ins in the neighborhood and had forgotten to mention them. She apologized for not discussing it first and offered to adjust the camera angles to respect my privacy better. But over the following days, I started noticing more cameras hidden throughout the flat. Tiny devices positioned to capture different angles of the common areas, all feeding back to Emma's monitoring setup. When I looked more carefully, I realized she had created comprehensive surveillance of our entire living space, recording everything that happened when I was home. I also discovered that Emma had been accessing my personal computer when I was out. Files had been moved, browser history showed searches I hadn't made, and my social media accounts had been accessed from IP addresses I didn't recognize. She'd been systematically gathering information about my personal life, my schedule, my relationships, and my online activities. When I confronted Emma about this invasion of privacy, her demeanor changed completely. She dropped the apologetic, reasonable flatmate persona and became coldly professional. She explained that her work required detailed background information about people in her environment, and that my presence in the flat made me part of her operational security considerations. Emma then showed me exactly what kind of content she created. Her monitors displayed dark websites with addresses I couldn't read, streaming platforms that required special browsers to access, and chat systems where users discussed upcoming broadcasts using terms I didn't understand. Her work wasn't gaming content or tutorials. She was involved in producing live streams for audiences willing to pay for authentic, unscripted content. The surveillance of our flat wasn't for security, it was for content creation. Emma had been documenting my daily routines, my reactions to stress, my interactions with visitors, and my responses to various situations. She'd been creating a detailed profile of my behavior patterns and psychological responses for audiences who paid premium rates for authentic material. Most disturbing was learning that I hadn't randomly responded to a flatmate advertisement. Emma had specifically targeted me after researching my background, my studies, my family situation, and my social connections. She'd identified me as someone who would be suitable for her purposes, isolated enough to be vulnerable, but connected enough to generate interest from her audience. Emma explained that her viewers had been following my story for weeks through the surveillance footage. They'd watched me cook dinner, study for exams, talk on the phone with family, and navigate the stress of postgraduate studies. I'd unknowingly become a character in an ongoing narrative that thousands of people were consuming as entertainment. The final phase of Emma's project was transitioning from passive observation to interactive content. Her audience had paid substantial amounts to move beyond just watching my daily routine to influencing what happened to me. Emma showed me chat logs where viewers discussed scenarios they wanted to see enacted, specific situations they wanted me placed in, and reactions they hoped to capture on camera. I tried to leave immediately, but Emma calmly explained that I was already too deeply involved in her operation to simply walk away. She showed me evidence of my unwitting participation, footage of me in various states of undress, recordings of private phone conversations, and documentation of my daily routines that would be embarrassing if shared publicly. More significantly, Emma revealed that she'd been using my identity for aspects of her dark web activities. Communications sent from my computer, financial transactions processed through accounts opened in my name, and interactions with her network that created digital trails linking me to her operation. If authorities ever investigated her activities, the evidence would suggest I was a willing participant rather than an unwitting victim. Emma's audience had been anticipating this revelation for weeks. The moment when I discovered the truth about my situation was itself content they'd paid to see. My shock, fear, and growing understanding of my predicament had all been broadcast live to viewers who found authentic reactions more entertaining than scripted performances. The final broadcast was scheduled for the following night. Emma's viewers had paid premium rates to see the conclusion of my story, the moment when passive observation became active participation. She explained that my background in social work made me particularly interesting to her audience. People who enjoyed watching those trained to help others become helpless themselves. I managed to escape that night while Emma was distracted with technical preparations. I grabbed what cash I had and left Manchester without telling anyone where I was going. But Emma's surveillance network extended beyond our flat. She'd been monitoring my phone, my email, my social media accounts, and my financial transactions. Every move I made was being tracked and reported back to her operation. Over the past week, I've been moving between different hotels, paying cash when possible, avoiding main roads and CCTV cameras, but they keep finding me. Hotel staff who seem to recognize me despite my using different names. Other guests who ask too many questions about my plans. Messages sent to devices I thought were secure. Yesterday, I received a package at the hotel I'm staying in. A package addressed to a false name I'd only used for one night. Inside was a tablet computer showing a live stream of my current hotel room, apparently filmed from multiple hidden cameras. Text on the screen explained that Emma's audience had been following my escape attempt and were eager to see the conclusion of my story. The message included details about my movements over the past week, demonstrating that their surveillance had been comprehensive despite my attempts at evasion. They knew which trains I'd taken, which hotels I'd stayed in, even which restaurants I'd eaten at. Every step of my escape had been monitored and broadcast to paying viewers. Tonight's broadcast is being promoted as the finale of what Emma's audience calls the Social Worker series. They've been following my story from the beginning, watching me search for accommodation, move in with Emma, gradually discover the truth about my situation, and attempt to escape. My real life has become a multi-part series for dark web entertainment. The scheduled broadcast location is an address here in Liverpool. Emma's technical setup has apparently been relocated to continue the production, despite my escape from Manchester. Her audience expects to see the conclusion of my story, and they've invested too much money in following the narrative to accept an anticlimactic ending. I could go to the police, but Emma has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in her dark web activities. My computer history, financial records, and communication logs would all support a narrative of voluntary involvement rather than victimization. The surveillance footage could be edited to remove context and present my actions as cooperative rather than unknowing. Emma's operation is too sophisticated, too well planned, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The dark web provides anonymity for her viewers, untraceable payment methods, and platforms that can't be easily monitored or shut down by authorities. She can broadcast from anywhere to anyone without meaningful oversight or accountability. Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch the conclusion of the Social Worker series. They've paid to see someone trained to recognize and prevent exploitation become the victim of exactly the kind of predatory behavior I studied in university. The irony is part of what makes the content valuable to Emma's audience. I'm writing this from the bathroom of my hotel room because it's the only space where I can't see any obvious camera equipment. But I know they're still watching somehow. The tablet shows real-time footage of the main room, tracking my movements even when I think I'm unobserved. In a few hours, I'll have to decide whether to show up at the address they provided or continue running. But Emma has demonstrated that her surveillance network can find me anywhere, and her audience has been promised a conclusion to my story. The show, as they say, must go on. The most terrifying realization is that Emma's operation probably has multiple series running simultaneously. How many other people might be living unknowingly under surveillance, gradually being prepared for their own final broadcasts? How many students, workers, and ordinary people might be unwitting stars of dark web entertainment? The technology exists to monitor anyone, anywhere without their knowledge. The dark web provides platforms for consuming authentic suffering as entertainment. And there are people willing to pay substantial amounts to watch real victims discover their situation too late to escape it. I never thought my social work training would become relevant to my own survival. But here I am, recognizing all the signs of systematic exploitation and predatory behavior that I learned to identify in vulnerable populations. The difference is that this time, I'm the vulnerable one. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled The Final Session. Emma's audience is expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, and real consequences for someone who spent years learning to protect others, but couldn't protect herself. The irony would be funny if it weren't so terrifying. It's funny how sometimes the most innocent decisions lead you down the darkest paths. Take my decision to become a night security guard at 34, for instance. I thought I was just taking a quiet job that would give me time to figure out what to do with the rest of my life after the redundancy from the council. Instead, I ended up discovering things about human nature that I wish I could forget. The job was at a small industrial estate in Coventry. Nothing glamorous, just a collection of warehouses and small manufacturing units that needed someone to walk around with a torch and make sure nobody was nicking anything. 12-hour shifts, 4 nights a week, decent pay for essentially doing nothing but staying awake and occasionally checking that doors were still locked. The site office had a proper security setup. Banks of monitors showing feeds from cameras dotted around the estate, a comfortable chair, and most importantly, a decent internet connection. Management had made it clear that as long as I did my hourly rounds and filed the incident reports, what I did with the rest of my time was my business. Perfect for someone trying to work out their next career move. Those first few weeks, I spent the quiet hours browsing job sites and updating my CV, but there's only so much career planning you can do at 3 in the morning before your brain starts craving something more stimulating. That's when I discovered online communities for night shift workers, forums where security guards, hospital porters, warehouse staff, and various other nocturnal workers would gather to share stories and keep each other company during the long, empty hours. It was through one of these communities that I first heard about the deeper parts of the internet, not the obvious stuff that makes headlines, drug markets, and identity theft, but the more obscure corners where people gathered to discuss things that wouldn't be tolerated on mainstream platforms. Privacy advocates, political dissidents, people who valued anonymity above all else. The appeal was obvious. After spending most of my adult life in local government, where every email was monitored and every website visit was logged, the idea of browsing the internet without leaving digital footprints felt liberating. Like taking off a suit of armor you'd been wearing so long you'd forgotten it was there. The technical side wasn't as complicated as I'd expected. There were guides, tutorials, entire communities dedicated to helping newcomers navigate safely. Within a few nights, I had access to a parallel internet that existed alongside the one most people knew about, invisible and unregulated. Most of it was surprisingly mundane. Forums discussing philosophy and politics, marketplaces selling legal but hard-to-find items, communities of people who simply preferred to communicate without corporate oversight. The criminal element was there certainly, but it felt more like a small part of a much larger ecosystem, rather than the dominant feature the media made it out to be. It was during my third week of exploration that I stumbled across the discussion about live streaming. Someone in a privacy forum had posted a technical question about bandwidth requirements for real-time video over encrypted networks. The conversation that followed was academic in tone, but disturbing in content. They were discussing the feasibility of broadcasting live events to paying audiences without law enforcement being able to trace the source. Red rooms were mentioned only in passing, dismissed by most participants as urban legends that didn't match the technical realities of anonymous streaming. But one poster disagreed, claiming they'd encountered legitimate examples hidden deep within invitation-only networks. They refused to provide details, but something about their matter-of-fact tone suggested they weren't making it up. That comment stayed with me over the following nights. During my hourly rounds, walking between empty warehouses with only my torch for company, I found myself thinking about what might be happening in other buildings, in other cities, in other countries. Places where people gathered to watch things that should never be filmed, let alone broadcast to paying customers. The search took longer than I'd expected. Every obvious lead turned out to be a scam or a honeypot. The deeper I dug, the more sophisticated the gatekeeping became. This wasn't just about knowing the right websites. It was about establishing credibility within communities that valued secrecy above all else. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. I'd been helping moderate a forum for night shift workers. Nothing dramatic, just removing spam and settling the occasional disagreement. When I received a private message from someone I'd never interacted with before. They claimed to appreciate my contributions to the community and wondered if I'd be interested in discussing more sensitive topics in a private channel. The conversation that followed was careful, coded, full of references I didn't understand, and questions designed to test my knowledge and intentions. Gradually, it became clear that they were evaluating whether I could be trusted with access to something most people would never see. The invitation, when it finally came, was for a private network that existed several layers deeper than anything I'd encountered before. Access was limited to verified members only, with new users requiring sponsorship from existing participants. The verification process was extensive. Proof of identity, background checks, even references from other members who could vouch for your discretion. It took nearly 2 months to gain full access, and by then I wasn't entirely sure I wanted it anymore. But curiosity had become compulsion, and the same methodical approach that had served me well in local government carried me through the final stages of the approval process. The private network was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 100 active users at most, but the content was unlike anything I'd seen before. They called themselves documentarians, claiming to preserve authentic human experiences that would otherwise go unrecorded. But the experiences they were interested in documenting were things most people would never want to see. The Red Room section was hidden within a subsection marked Live Archives. 3 different providers, each claiming to offer unscripted real-time content featuring genuine participants. The language was clinical, designed to maintain plausible deniability while making the actual service clear to interested viewers. I spent weeks researching the providers before making contact with one. Their operation appeared professional. Encrypted communications, scheduled sessions, technical support for viewers having connection issues. They operated more like a legitimate streaming service than the criminal enterprise I'd expected. The booking process was surprisingly straightforward. Payment handled through an escrow system that provided guarantees for both parties. I was provided with connection details and technical requirements for a session scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 a.m. When the time came, I found myself sitting in the security office, surrounded by monitors showing empty car parks and darkened warehouses, about to witness something I knew would change how I saw the world. The session began promptly at the scheduled time, connecting me to a live stream that took several minutes to stabilize through the encrypted network. The video quality was poor but functional, showing what appeared to be a small, windowless room with concrete walls. A single chair sat in the center, currently empty, while cameras captured the space from multiple angles. A chat interface allowed communication with other viewers, though the messages were sparse and cryptic. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. Just an empty room occasionally flickering as the stream quality adjusted. I was beginning to wonder if this was some kind of performance art, when a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. The man who entered was unremarkable, middle-aged, wearing simple clothing, moving with the casual confidence of someone in familiar surroundings. He spent several minutes adjusting equipment I couldn't see clearly, occasionally glancing at the camera as if checking the feed quality. Then he left, and we were back to watching an empty room. The waiting was almost worse than what came next. Other viewers were using the chat to place bets, make requests, discuss payment options for specific outcomes. I realized I was witnessing something that existed at the intersection of entertainment and crime, where the audience was complicit in whatever was about to happen. When the door opened again, there were two figures. The same man as before, now accompanied by someone much younger. A woman, early 20s perhaps, who seemed confused about where she was or how she'd gotten there. She looked around the room with growing alarm, taking in the cameras and bare walls and single chair with obvious distress. The chat exploded with activity. Dozens of messages appearing faster than I could read them. Viewers making suggestions and placing bets on what would happen next. Bitcoin addresses were being shared. Payments arranged in real time. I watched in horrified fascination as what I was witnessing transformed from observation into participation. The man guided the woman to the chair with gentle but firm insistence. She kept looking directly at the cameras, as if trying to understand what they were recording. Her expression shifted from confusion to fear as the reality of her situation became clear. I should have closed the browser immediately, should have reported what I was seeing, though I had no idea how to explain where I'd found it or whether anyone would believe me. Instead, I found myself paralyzed, unable to look away from something I knew was fundamentally wrong. The man began responding to requests from the chat. He would pause, read something on a screen I couldn't see, then nod or make adjustments to whatever he was preparing. The audience was directing the performance, choosing what happened next through their messages and payments. Then something changed. The steady stream of chat messages stopped abruptly, replaced by a series of warnings from different users. Abort session, abort session, abort session. The man looked directly at the camera, his expression shifting from professional calm to genuine alarm. He moved quickly to something off-screen, and within seconds the video feed cut out entirely. I stared at a blank screen showing only a connection error message. When I tried to reload the page, the entire site was gone. The private network, the forums, even my access credentials, everything had vanished as if it had never existed. Over the following days, I tried to convince myself that what I'd witnessed had been elaborate fiction, a performance designed to extract money from people curious about the darker corners of human nature. The production quality could have been achieved with basic equipment, and everything I'd seen could have been staged by competent actors. But I kept thinking about those final moments before the stream ended. The way the man's demeanor had changed when he'd seen those warning messages. The speed with which everything had shut down. It felt less like a show ending and more like an emergency evacuation. 2 weeks later, I noticed the van. It was parked across from the industrial estate entrance when I arrived for my shift on Tuesday night. Nothing unusual about that. People parked there regularly to use the cash machine at the petrol station next door. But this van was still there when I did my first round at midnight, and again at 1 o'clock, and again at 2. Through the security office windows, I could see it clearly in the light from the street lamps. Dark blue, no markings, windows tinted too dark to see inside. Just sitting there, facing the estate entrance, as if whoever was inside was watching for something. Or someone. The van was there for 3 consecutive nights before it disappeared. During that time, I noticed other things. Cars that seemed to follow the same route past the estate at regular intervals. A jogger who ran the same circuit at 3:30 every morning, always glancing towards the security office as they passed. Small anomalies that individually meant nothing but together suggested a pattern. On the Friday night, after the van had finally gone, I received an email at my personal account. The sender was anonymous, the subject line blank. The message contained only a single line of text. "We know what you watched." Below that was an attachment, a photograph taken through the security office window, showing me sitting at the desk with my laptop open. The image was clear enough to make out details of the screen, though not clear enough to see exactly what I'd been viewing. I deleted the email immediately and ran every security scan I could think of. Changed all my passwords, cleared my browsing history, even formatted the laptop's hard drive. But the damage was already done. Whoever had sent that message had been close enough to photograph me through the office window without triggering any of the motion sensors around the building. That was 6 months ago. I've changed jobs since then. Couldn't concentrate on the security work after that. Kept seeing suspicious vehicles that probably weren't there and hearing footsteps that were likely just the building settling. I work days now, in an office with other people around, where everything feels safer and more predictable. But I still get emails occasionally, never more than once a month, always from different anonymous addresses. Sometimes it's another photograph, my car in the supermarket car park, my flat building taken from across the street, me walking to work on Tuesday morning. Once, it was a copy of my employment records from the security company. Each one carries the same message. "We know what you watched." I don't know what they want from me. Money, silence, complicity. None of it would surprise me at this point. But I've learned that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And some audiences never stop watching, even after the show has ended. The thing that bothers me most isn't the surveillance or even the constant feeling of being monitored. It's knowing that somewhere out there, in windowless rooms with concrete walls and multiple cameras, things are still happening that should never be filmed, that people are still gathering online to watch and direct and pay for experiences that exist at the furthest edges of human cruelty. And now I'm part of it, whether I want to be or not. A witness who can't testify. A viewer who can't unsee. Connected forever to something I stumbled across during the long, quiet hours of a night shift in Coventry. Sometimes I wonder if that was always the plan. If the whole thing, the forums, the invitations, the careful vetting process, was designed not just to provide entertainment for paying customers, but to create a network of compromised witnesses, people who'd seen too much to ever feel completely safe again. People like me, who now understand that the worst monsters aren't hiding under beds or lurking in dark alleys. They're sitting in rooms just like the one I'm in now, watching screens that show things no human being should ever have to see. What would you say if I told you that taking care of an elderly person could lead to becoming the star of a dark web murder broadcast? 4 months ago, I was just a care worker in Sheffield, trying to pay off my student loans and build some experience before applying to nursing school. Now I'm hiding in a service station outside York, and tomorrow night thousands of people are going to watch me become the entertainment in a red room that I helped set up without realizing what I was doing. I work for a private care agency that provides live-in support for elderly clients who want to remain in their own homes rather than move to residential facilities. It's demanding work, 12-hour shifts, difficult clients, family members who expect miracles, but it pays better than most jobs available to someone with just A-levels and a care certificate. The assignment that changed everything started in late September. I was assigned to provide overnight care for a man named Arthur Henley, an 80-year-old former academic living alone in a large Victorian house in Crooks. Mr. Henley had early-stage dementia and required supervision during the night, as he had a tendency to wander and had fallen several times trying to navigate his house in the dark. The house was impressive but dated, 3 stories, original features, and a basement that Mr. Henley used for storage. He'd been a professor of computer science at Sheffield University before retiring, and the house was filled with books, academic papers, and what appeared to be decades of accumulated technology. Old computers, servers, and networking equipment were scattered throughout various rooms. Mr. Henley was polite but distant during my first few weeks on the assignment. His dementia seemed relatively mild, occasional confusion about dates or names, some difficulty with complex tasks, but generally coherent and self-sufficient during daylight hours. He maintained a regular routine of reading, light gardening, and what he called his research projects in the basement. My role was primarily supervisory, ensuring he didn't wander outside at night, helping if he became confused or distressed, and managing his medication schedule. During the day, Mr. Henley was largely independent, so I had considerable downtime to study for my nursing school applications or catch up on personal tasks. About a month into the assignment, I started noticing some unusual aspects of Mr. Henley's routine. He received frequent deliveries of computer equipment, always paying in cash and insisting on handling the transactions personally. When I asked about his continued interest in technology, he explained that he was working on research projects related to his former academic work. Mr. Henley also had visitors at odd hours, usually late in the evening or very early in the morning. These weren't social calls from friends or family, but business-like meetings with younger people who would arrive with equipment or documents. When I asked about these visits, Mr. Henley explained that he was consulting on technical projects for former colleagues. The basement became increasingly off-limits during this period. Mr. Henley installed new locks and made it clear that his research space was private. I could hear equipment running constantly, humming servers, cooling fans, and what sounded like multiple computers operating simultaneously. The electricity bills must have been substantial. Around this time, Mr. Henley began asking me to help with some of his technical projects. Simple tasks initially, moving equipment, organizing cables, cleaning workspace areas. He offered to pay me extra for this assistance, which I welcomed given my financial situation. The work seemed harmless enough, just basic maintenance and organization. Gradually, Mr. Henley's request became more specific. He needed help setting up camera equipment in various rooms of the house, testing lighting configurations in different spaces, ensuring that recording devices had clear sight lines and optimal audio pickup. He explained that he was documenting his house's architecture and historical features for academic purposes. The camera installations were professional-grade equipment, far more sophisticated than anything needed for simple documentation. Multiple angles in each room, motion sensors, night vision capabilities, and centralized recording systems that fed back to his basement setup. When I commented on the complexity, Mr. Henley explained that thoroughness was essential for proper academic documentation. I also helped Mr. Henley test various aspects of his recording systems. He would have me move through different rooms while he monitored the coverage from his basement, adjusting camera angles and audio levels to ensure optimal capture quality. He said this was necessary to document how people interacted with historical architecture. During these tests, Mr. Henley would give me specific instructions about timing, positioning, and behavior. Stand in certain locations for predetermined durations. React to various stimuli he would introduce. Follow scripted movements through the house while he recorded everything from his monitoring station. The level of detail seemed excessive for architectural documentation. As weeks passed, Mr. Henley's dementia symptoms appeared to fluctuate dramatically. Some days, he seemed completely lucid and organized, managing complex technical projects with expertise that seemed inconsistent with cognitive decline. Other days, he appeared genuinely confused and disoriented, requiring assistance with basic tasks. I began to suspect that Mr. Henley's condition might not be as severe as initially diagnosed, or that he was deliberately exaggerating his symptoms. His moments of clarity always coincided with technical work or visits from his mysterious colleagues. His confusion seemed to occur primarily when I asked questions about his projects or tried to understand what he was really doing. 3 weeks ago, everything became clear in the worst possible way. Mr. Henley had asked me to test a new camera installation in the basement, claiming he needed to document some architectural features of the foundation. When I went downstairs, I discovered that the space had been completely transformed from a storage area into something resembling a professional studio. Multiple camera angles captured every inch of a central area that had been set up with restraints, medical equipment, and tools that clearly weren't for architectural documentation. Banks of monitors showed various live feeds from around the house, including rooms where I'd helped install cameras. Computer screens displayed dark web sites with streaming interfaces and viewer count displays. Most disturbing was seeing my own image on several monitors. Live feeds showing me in different rooms of the house, recorded footage from previous weeks, and edited compilations of my movements and reactions during Mr. Henley's tests. I realized that his architectural documentation project had been recording me extensively, creating content that was apparently being shared online. Mr. Henley appeared behind me, no longer showing any signs of confusion or dementia. He explained calmly that his condition had been largely fabricated to create a suitable cover for his actual work. Care workers were ideal subjects because they were isolated, had regular schedules, and were accustomed to working in private homes without supervision. He showed me the full extent of his operation. The basement was equipped for live streaming to dark web audiences who paid for authentic, unscripted content. The house had been converted into a production facility where he could create material featuring unwitting participants who thought they were just doing their jobs. Mr. Henley's research projects involved documenting potential subjects, testing their reactions to various situations, and gradually preparing them for final broadcasts. The care worker arrangement provided perfect cover, a legitimate reason for someone to be in the house regularly, explaining any unusual behavior or equipment to neighbors or family members. My weeks of helping with camera installations and testing had been preparation for my own broadcast. Mr. Henley's audience had been watching my daily routines, learning my behavior patterns, and anticipating the moment when I would transition from unknowing assistant to featured content. The visitors who came at odd hours weren't academic colleagues. They were part of a network that specialized in creating dark web entertainment using people who had no idea they were being groomed for participation. Care workers, domestic staff, delivery personnel, anyone whose job provided access to private spaces and isolated working conditions. Mr. Henley explained that tomorrow night's broadcast would feature the culmination of months of preparation. His audience had been following my story through surveillance footage, watching me gradually become complicit in setting up the very equipment that would be used for my final performance. I managed to escape while Mr. Henley was distracted with technical preparations, but I know the surveillance network extends beyond his house. They've been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements, and building detailed profiles of everyone in my life. Running might delay the inevitable, but it won't prevent it. Since leaving Sheffield, I've been moving between different locations, but they keep finding me. Messages sent to devices I thought were secure. People who seem to recognize me despite my using different names. Evidence that my movements are being tracked and reported back to Mr. Henley's operation. Yesterday, I received a package at the hotel where I'm staying. A package containing a tablet computer that showed live feeds from Mr. Henley's house. The basement had been prepared for broadcast, with professional lighting and multiple camera angles focused on the central area where I'd unknowingly helped position equipment. Text on the screen explained that tomorrow's broadcast was titled The Care Worker Series Finale, and that thousands of viewers had been following my story from the beginning. They'd watched me arrive for the assignment, gradually discover the truth about my situation, and attempt to escape. My real life had become entertainment for people willing to pay for authentic reactions to genuine danger. The message included details about my movements over the past few days, demonstrating that their surveillance had continued despite my leaving Mr. Henley's house. They knew which trains I'd taken, where I'd been staying, even what I'd eaten for my last few meals. Every step of my escape had been monitored and possibly broadcast to paying audiences. I could go to the police, but Mr. Henley has spent months creating evidence that would suggest I was a willing participant in his dark web activities. Surveillance footage of me helping install cameras, testing equipment, and following his instructions could be edited to support a narrative of voluntary cooperation rather than unwitting assistance. The care agency would have records of my assignment to Mr. Henley's house, my regular presence there, and my involvement in his technical projects. Without context, my actions would appear to show someone knowingly participating in the preparation of illegal streaming equipment. Mr. Henley's operation is too sophisticated, too well established, too experienced at managing unwilling participants. The dementia diagnosis provides perfect cover for his activities. Who would suspect an elderly man with cognitive decline of running a complex dark web broadcasting network? Tomorrow night, thousands of people will watch the conclusion of the Care Worker series. They've paid to see someone whose job involves protecting vulnerable people become vulnerable themselves. The irony is part of what makes the content valuable to Mr. Henley's audience. I'm writing this from a service station toilet because it's the only place where I can't see any obvious surveillance equipment. But I know they're still watching somehow. The tablet shows real-time updates about my location and activities, suggesting that their monitoring capabilities extend far beyond Mr. Henley's house. In roughly 10 hours, I'll have to decide whether to show up at the address they've provided or continue running. But Mr. Henley has demonstrated that his network can find me anywhere, and his audience has been promised a conclusion to my story. The most terrifying realization is that Mr. Henley's operation probably targets multiple care workers simultaneously. How many other people might be unknowingly helping prepare equipment for their own final broadcasts? How many elderly clients might be using their care arrangements as cover for dark web activities? The care industry provides perfect access to vulnerable workers who are isolated, poorly paid, and desperate for employment. Care workers enter private homes, work alone for extended periods, and are expected to assist with whatever tasks their clients require. It's an ideal setup for exploitation. Mr. Henley spent decades in computer science, developing expertise that he's now using to create sophisticated surveillance and streaming operations. His academic background provides credibility. His age and supposed medical condition deflect suspicion, and his resources allow him to maintain complex technical infrastructure. The dark web provides anonymity for his viewers, untraceable payment methods, and platforms that can't be easily monitored or shut down by authorities. He can broadcast authentic suffering to paying audiences without meaningful oversight or accountability. Tomorrow's broadcast is being promoted as authentic content, featuring genuine reactions from someone who doesn't understand what's happening until it's too late. Mr. Henley's audience values realism over performance, preferring to watch real people discover their situation in real time. I never thought my care work would make me a target for this kind of exploitation. I thought the biggest risks were difficult clients or workplace injuries. I never imagined that helping an elderly person could lead to becoming the star of my own murder broadcast. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so terrifying. I spent months caring for someone I thought was vulnerable, only to discover that I was the vulnerable one all along. Tomorrow's broadcast is titled The Final Shift. Mr. Henley's audience is expecting authentic reactions, genuine fear, and real consequences for someone who thought she was just doing her job. The care worker becomes the one who needs caring for, and there's no one left to help. Imagine you're lying awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling of your bedsit in Croydon, listening to the couple upstairs having another screaming match through the paper-thin walls. The divorce papers are still scattered across your kitchen table from where your solicitor dropped them off that afternoon, and the reality of your new life, if you can call it that, is starting to sink in properly. That's how it started for me anyway. 6 months of sleeping rough on my mate's sofa until I could scrape together enough for the deposit on this place. 38 years old and starting over with nothing but a suitcase and a laptop that'd seen better days. The insomnia had been getting worse since the split. Sarah had kept the house, obviously. Her name was on the mortgage. Her parents had helped with the deposit. Fair enough, I suppose. but it didn't make the transition any easier. I'd tried everything for the sleeplessness: herbal teas, meditation apps, those expensive blackout curtains that promise to transform your bedroom into a cave. Nothing worked. By 3:30 most nights, I'd given up entirely and found myself hunched over the laptop at my tiny kitchen table, aimlessly scrolling through whatever rubbish the internet had to offer. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I first stumbled across the forums. Not the usual Reddit threads or Facebook groups, deeper than that. Someone on a cryptocurrency discussion board had mentioned something about hidden marketplaces, places where you could find things that weren't available through normal channels. Nothing sinister, mind you, just hard-to-find electronics, rare books, that sort of thing. The conversation had piqued my curiosity. I'd heard about the dark web before, of course. Everyone has. Usually in the context of drug dealers and identity theft, the sort of thing that makes for sensational newspaper headlines. But there was something almost academic about the way these forum users discussed it. They talked about privacy, about digital freedom, about accessing information that governments and corporations would prefer you didn't see. It seemed less criminal, more philosophical. I told myself I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The browser installed easily enough, though it took ages to connect through all those layers. When it finally loaded, I found myself staring at a search engine that looked like something from the early days of the internet. Basic, functional, utterly unremarkable. For the first few nights, I just browsed randomly. There were forums dedicated to every conceivable topic, marketplaces selling everything from vintage records to questionable pharmaceutical products, and endless political discussions that made the comments section of any mainstream news site look positively civilized. Most of it was surprisingly mundane, actually. Not the digital den of iniquity I'd been expecting. The red rooms were mentioned in passing during a conversation about live streaming technology. Someone had posted a technical question about bandwidth requirements for real-time video, and another user had made a joke about not needing that much speed unless you were running a red room. Several people had laughed, or at least posted laughing emojis, but I didn't get the reference. A bit of searching revealed that red rooms were supposedly live streams where viewers could watch and direct real-time violence. Urban legend stuff, mostly. Digital folklore. Every explanation I found came with disclaimers about how they probably didn't really exist. How the stories were just myths designed to make the dark web seem more sinister than it actually was. The consensus seemed to be that the technical requirements alone made them impractical. Real-time video streaming over Tor was unreliable at best, and the whole premise seemed more like something from a horror film than actual criminal enterprise. Still, the idea lingered. During those long, sleepless nights, I found myself thinking about it more than I probably should have. Not because I wanted to find one, you understand. The whole concept was revolting. But there was something compulsive about the mystery of it, like picking at a scab or probing a sore tooth with your tongue. It was probably around my third week of regular dark web browsing when I first saw the link. Hidden in a forum discussion about online privacy, posted by a user with a string of random characters for a name. No description, no context, just an address that was significantly longer than the usual ones I'd encountered. Something about it looked different, more complex, more deliberately obscured. I stared at that link for the better part of an hour. Common sense told me to close the browser, make some tea, maybe try to get some sleep. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when you're sitting alone in a grotty bedsit at 4 a.m. with nothing but your own thoughts for company. The page took nearly 10 minutes to load. When it finally appeared, It was almost disappointingly simple. Just a black background with a single video player embedded in the center. No text, no navigation, nothing to indicate what I was looking at. The video player showed a loading symbol, slowly spinning against the darkness. Then it started. The feed was grainy, clearly shot with a cheap webcam in poor lighting. It showed what appeared to be a small, windowless room with concrete walls. There was a single chair in the center, currently empty, and a table pushed against one wall. The image quality was terrible, pixelated and stuttering, with frequent dropouts that left the screen frozen for several seconds at a time. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Just an empty room, occasionally flickering as the video stream struggled to maintain connection. I was beginning to think it was just some sort of technical test when I noticed the chat window that had appeared beside the video player. The messages were scrolling past too quickly to read properly, but I caught fragments. Usernames that were just random strings of letters and numbers, posting short, cryptic comments. Some seemed to be discussing the technical quality of the stream. Others were asking when something was going to start. A few were considerably more explicit about what they hoped to see. I should have closed the browser then, should have deleted Tor, wiped my browsing history, and pretended I'd never seen any of it. Instead, I found myself refreshing the page, trying to get a clearer picture as the video quality fluctuated wildly. Around 4:30, someone entered the room. It was a man, though the poor image quality made it difficult to make out details. Middle-aged, wearing what looked like overalls or a boiler suit. He moved with purpose, arranging items on the table that I couldn't quite make out through the pixelated mess of the video feed. The chat window exploded with activity, dozens of messages appearing and disappearing faster than I could follow. The man in the overalls seemed to be responding to the chat, though I couldn't hear any audio. He would pause, look directly at the camera, then nod or shake his head. Sometimes he would hold up fingers, 1, 2, 3, as if counting or responding to numerical questions from the viewers. Then he left the room again, and we were back to the empty chair and concrete walls. The waiting was almost worse than whatever was coming next. The chat had settled into a steady rhythm of anticipation and crude speculation. I found myself checking the time obsessively. 4:30 became 4:45, then 5 o'clock, then 10 past. Part of me hoped nothing else would happen, that this was all some elaborate hoax or art project. But another part, a part I didn't particularly want to acknowledge, was curious about what came next. When the door opened again, he wasn't alone. The second figure was smaller, harder to make out in the poor lighting. They moved differently, hesitant, unsteady. As they got closer to the camera, I could see it was a woman, though the video quality made it impossible to determine much else about her appearance. She seemed confused, disoriented. The man in overalls guided her to the chair with what appeared to be gentle insistence. The chat went absolutely mental. Messages were appearing so fast they were just a blur of text. I caught glimpses of betting odds, requests for specific actions, discussions of payment methods. Bitcoin addresses were being posted and immediately deleted. The whole thing had the atmosphere of a twisted auction, with viewers bidding on what they wanted to see happen next. I should have stopped watching, should have closed the laptop and walked away. But something kept me glued to the screen. Not excitement, not anticipation, but a kind of horrified fascination, like watching a car accident unfold in slow motion. The man in overalls had returned to his table and was selecting tools with the care of a surgeon. The woman in the chair seemed to be talking, though without audio. I could only see her mouth moving. She looked around the room with growing agitation, testing the restraints that I was only now noticing, held her to the chair. Then something changed in the chat. The frenzied betting and crude requests suddenly stopped, replaced by a series of identical messages from different users. Feed compromised, feed compromised, feed compromised. The video cut out entirely. For a moment, I stared at a blank screen showing only a connection error message. Then the browser crashed completely, taking me back to my desktop. When I tried to reload the Tor browser, it wouldn't connect at all, just sat there attempting to establish a connection through the encrypted network without success. I spent the next hour trying to get back online, convinced that my internet connection had failed or that there was some problem with my laptop. But regular websites loaded fine through Chrome. It was only Tor that refused to work, as if something had completely blocked my access to the dark web. By 6 a.m, I'd given up and tried to get some sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grainy video feed. The empty room, the concrete walls, the woman in the chair. I kept thinking about those final moments before the connection died. The way she'd looked around the room, the careful way the man had selected his tools, the frantic energy of the chat as viewers realized something was wrong. The next few days passed in a haze of exhaustion and paranoia. Tor still wouldn't connect, no matter what I tried. I reinstalled the browser, reset my internet connection, even ran a full virus scan in case I'd picked up some kind of malware. Nothing worked. It was as if my computer had been permanently banned from accessing the dark web entirely. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the email I received 3 days later. It arrived in my regular inbox, not buried in spam or sent through some anonymous service. Just a normal email from what appeared to be a Gmail account with a random string of numbers for an address. The subject line was blank, and the message contained only a single line of text. "We know you were watching." Below that was a screenshot, poor quality, pixelated, but unmistakably from that night. It showed my laptop screen with the red room video playing, but taken from behind and slightly to the side. Someone had been in my bedsit while I was watching, standing just out of my peripheral vision, close enough to photograph my screen over my shoulder. I checked the timestamp on the email. It had been sent at 4:47 a.m., right around the time the video feed had cut out. I called the police, of course, explained about the break-in, showed them the email. But what could they do? No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, no physical evidence that anyone had been inside my flat. The email could have been sent from anywhere in the world. The screenshot could have been doctored. Without the original video, which I couldn't access anymore, there was no way to prove what I'd actually been watching. The officer who took my statement was polite, but clearly skeptical. He suggested I change my locks and maybe install a security camera, but his tone suggested he thought I was either lying or having some sort of breakdown. I couldn't really blame him. If someone had told me the same story 6 months earlier, I probably would have reacted the same way. That was 2 months ago. I've changed the locks twice, installed a chain and a door alarm, even moved my laptop so I can see the entire room while I'm using it. The insomnia has gotten worse, if anything. Most nights, I just sit at the kitchen table, watching the door and listening for footsteps in the hallway outside. Tor still won't work on my laptop. I've tried everything, different browsers, VPN services, even buying a completely new computer. Nothing connects. It's as if I've been permanently blacklisted from accessing that part of the internet entirely. But sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet and I'm sitting alone with just the glow of the laptop screen, for company, I wonder if that's actually protection rather than punishment. Because if they could get into my flat once without leaving any trace, if they could take that photograph without me noticing, if they could block my internet access with such precision, what else might they be capable of? I never found out what happened to the woman in the chair, never learned whether what I witnessed was real or just an elaborate hoax designed to draw in curious viewers like myself. But I keep thinking about those final messages in the chat, feed compromised, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, someone had been trying to help her, or if they'd simply been warning each other about people like me. The thing that bothers me most isn't the email or the photograph or even the break-in. It's the timing. The feed cut out at exactly the moment when things were about to go too far, as if someone had been monitoring not just the stream but the viewers as well, as if they knew precisely when to pull the plug to leave people like me with just enough glimpse to be haunted, but not enough evidence to cause real trouble. I still get emails sometimes, never more than once a week, always from different addresses, usually just timestamps, 4:43 a.m., 4:51 a.m., 4:38 a.m., but occasionally something more specific. Last week, I received one that simply said, "Still watching." I don't know if they mean they're still watching me, or if they think I'm still watching them. Both possibilities keep me awake at night. There's a moment when you realize that boredom can be more dangerous than any addiction. It creeps up slowly, day after day, of the same routine, until suddenly you're willing to do almost anything just to feel something different. That's how I ended up in a situation that still keeps me awake at night, checking the locks on my door and wondering if those footsteps in the hallway outside are just my imagination. I was in my second year at Leeds, studying media communications. One of those degrees that sounds impressive but basically prepares you for nothing except disappointment. Living in a grotty flat in Headingley that I could barely afford on my student loan. Spending most evenings alone because my flatmates had either dropped out or transferred to proper universities where they actually learned useful skills. The flat was everything you'd expect from student accommodation that charged £300 a month. Damp patches on the ceiling, heating that worked when it felt like it, and walls so thin you could hear the neighbours arguing about whose turn it was to buy toilet roll. My room was just large enough for a single bed, a desk that wobbled if you looked at it wrong, and a wardrobe that smelled permanently of mildew. Most nights followed the same pattern. Lectures during the day where lecturers who'd never worked in media told us about industries they'd only read about in textbooks. Then back to the flat for microwave meals and whatever passed for entertainment on my ancient laptop. I'd scroll through social media, watch YouTube videos, occasionally attempt to do coursework that felt increasingly pointless with each passing week. That's how I discovered the forums. Not deliberately. I was researching something for an essay about digital communities when I stumbled across discussions that went deeper than anything I'd seen on mainstream platforms. People talking about privacy, digital freedom, the parts of the internet that existed beyond corporate oversight. It seemed more real than anything I was learning in lectures, more honest than the sanitized world of Facebook and Instagram. The transition to exploring these hidden communities happened gradually. Someone would mention a forum that required special access, or reference a discussion happening on platforms I'd never heard of. Gradually, I learned about tools that could hide your digital footprint, networks that existed parallel to the regular internet but invisible to casual users. It wasn't difficult to access once you knew where to look. There were guides, communities dedicated to helping newcomers navigate safely. Within a few weeks, I had access to a whole parallel internet that felt more authentic than anything I'd encountered in my media studies courses. Most of it was surprisingly mundane. Political discussions that would be censored elsewhere, marketplaces for things that existed in legal grey areas, communities of people who simply preferred to communicate without corporate surveillance. It felt like discovering a hidden city that existed alongside the one everyone else knew about. The first few months, I just observed, reading forums about digital rights, privacy advocacy, discussions of philosophy and politics that went deeper than anything happening in university seminars. There was something addictive about being part of these communities, people who seemed more intelligent, more informed, more aware of how the world actually worked than anyone I knew in real life. I started contributing to discussions, sharing thoughts about media manipulation and corporate control of information. My posts were well received, and gradually I began to build a reputation within certain communities. People started recognizing my username, inviting me to private forums with more exclusive content. That's where I first heard about live streaming communities. Not the obvious stuff, gaming streams and social media influencers, but underground networks that broadcast content you couldn't find anywhere else. Documentary footage from conflict zones, investigative reports that mainstream media wouldn't touch, real journalism that existed outside corporate control. The concept appealed to me immediately. As someone studying media, the idea of accessing unfiltered content, seeing events as they actually happened rather than how they were packaged for mass consumption, felt like the logical extension of everything I was learning about information control and narrative manipulation. The invitation came through a private message from someone I'd been discussing media theory with for several weeks. They'd noticed my interest in authentic journalism and wondered if I'd like to observe some live investigative work. A research collective, they called it, documenting social experiments and human behavior studies that universities wouldn't approve, but which provided genuine insights into psychology and social dynamics. They included access details for a private streaming platform and a scheduled time, that Thursday at 10:30. No explanation of what specific research I'd be observing, just an invitation to witness something most people would never see. The academic framing made it feel legitimate, important, like I was being offered access to cutting-edge research that would enhance my understanding of media and human behavior. The streaming platform was simple but professional-looking. Clean interface, high-quality video feeds, chat functionality that allowed viewers to discuss what they were observing. When I connected at the appointed time, there were already about 15 people online, and they welcomed me warmly. The conversation was exactly what I'd expected from an academic community. People discussed research methodologies, shared insights about psychological principles, debated the ethics of observational studies. Someone mentioned they were pursuing a PhD in social psychology at Durham. Another person talked about their work in documentary filmmaking. They seemed like exactly the kind of intelligent, engaged people I'd been hoping to find in university, but never had. The research subject that night was social isolation and peer pressure. We were observing how an individual responded to being placed in an unfamiliar environment with limited social contact, measuring their psychological adaptation and decision-making under stress. The academic discussion was fascinating. People analyzed body language, predicted behavioral responses, shared relevant research from established psychology journals. The observation space was a small, clinical-looking room with white walls and professional lighting. A single chair faced multiple cameras, and monitoring equipment lined one wall. It looked exactly like the kind of setup you'd expect from a legitimate research facility, clean and organized, and obviously expensive. The subject was a young man, probably around my age, who'd volunteered for what he believed was a standard psychology experiment. The researchers explained through the chat that he'd been told he was participating in a study about decision-making under stress, which was technically accurate, but didn't reveal the full scope of what was being measured. What followed was subtle psychological manipulation presented as scientific methodology. The subject was asked to make increasingly difficult choices, each decision designed to measure his responses to social pressure and isolation. The academic observers discussed his reactions with clinical detachment, noting signs of stress and predicting how his behavior would change as the experiment progressed. I found myself genuinely engaged with the research. This was the kind of real-world psychology that my university courses only touched on theoretically. Here was an actual experiment, measuring genuine human responses in controlled conditions. The academic discussion was more sophisticated than anything happening in my lectures, and I felt privileged to be observing cutting-edge research as it happened. Over the following weeks, I became a regular participant in these observation sessions. Different subjects, different experimental scenarios, but always the same rigorous academic approach. The research collective was studying various aspects of human psychology: social conformity, authority compliance, stress responses, decision-making under pressure. Each session provided new insights that enhanced my understanding of media manipulation and audience psychology. The other observers were consistently impressive. Postgraduate students, academic researchers, documentary filmmakers interested in authentic human behavior. They shared reading recommendations, discussed theoretical frameworks, debated ethical considerations with the kind of intellectual sophistication I'd been hoping to find in university. These felt like the real education I'd been looking for. My contributions to the discussions were increasingly valued by the group. They seemed impressed by my insights into media theory and audience psychology, often asking for my perspective on how different experimental scenarios might be perceived by mainstream audiences. Gradually, I began to feel like a genuine member of the research community rather than just an observer. That's when they started suggesting I might be interested in contributing more directly to the research. The suggestion came casually, almost as an afterthought, during a particularly engaging discussion about experimental methodology. Someone mentioned that having perspectives from different academic backgrounds would enhance the research, and several people agreed that my media studies knowledge would provide valuable insights into audience psychology and narrative construction. The research coordinator, the person who'd originally invited me, explained that they were always looking for participants who understood the academic value of the work. Someone with my background could contribute both as an observer and as a subject, providing comparative data about how media-literate individuals responded to the same experimental conditions they'd been testing on less educated volunteers. I felt flattered. These people, whose intelligence and academic credentials I respected, were telling me I had something valuable to offer. They weren't just inviting me to observe research. They were asking me to become part of it, to contribute to studies that could advance understanding of human psychology and media manipulation. The logistics were straightforward. They operated several research facilities around the country, including one in Manchester that would be convenient for me to reach from Leeds. Sessions typically lasted a few hours, and participants were compensated for their time. More importantly, I would be contributing to research that had genuine academic value, work that might eventually be published in respected journals. I agreed without hesitation. The opportunity to be part of legitimate psychological research, especially research that aligned with my academic interests, was exactly the kind of experience that would distinguish my degree from the theoretical nonsense most of my classmates were learning. The arrangements were handled through encrypted messaging, which seemed appropriate for sensitive research that hadn't yet been published. They provided an address in Manchester's city centre and a time, the following Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. I was told to bring identification and any questions I might have about the research methodology. The building was exactly what I'd expected from a legitimate research facility. Modern office block in Manchester's business district, professional signage, security desk in the lobby. I gave my name to the receptionist, who confirmed my appointment and directed me to the 7th floor. The research coordinator met me at the lift, an academic-looking woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She seemed exactly right for the role, speaking with the kind of measured authority I associated with university lecturers, but with more genuine warmth than most of my actual professors managed. The facility itself was impressive. Clean corridors lined with office doors bearing academic titles, research laboratories with expensive-looking equipment, meeting rooms where serious-looking people discussed what appeared to be legitimate academic work. Everything reinforced the impression that this was real research being conducted by qualified professionals. Dr. Mitchell explained the day's experimental protocol as we walked towards the observation room. They were testing responses to social isolation, combined with peer pressure, measuring how quickly intelligent individuals adapted their behavior when placed in unfamiliar social situations. My media studies background made me an ideal subject, she explained, because I would be more aware than most people of the techniques being used, allowing them to measure the effectiveness of these methods on educated, media-literate participants. The observation room was larger than it had appeared through the streaming platform. The same clinical white walls and professional lighting, but seeing it in person made the setup seem even more legitimate. This was clearly expensive equipment, operated by people who knew what they were doing. Other members of the research team were present, people I recognized from the streaming sessions, though seeing them in person made them seem more human, more relatable. They greeted me warmly, expressing genuine excitement about my participation in the research. Someone mentioned that my insights during previous observation sessions had been particularly valuable, and they were looking forward to seeing how I responded as a subject rather than an observer. The initial part of the experiment was exactly what I'd expected. Basic questionnaires about my background and psychological profile, measurements of baseline stress indicators, explanations of the monitoring equipment that would track my responses throughout the session. Everything was conducted with the kind of professional methodology I associated with legitimate academic research. Then they explained the specific experimental scenario. I would be placed in the observation chair and asked to make a series of decisions while being monitored by the research team. The decisions would start simple but gradually become more complex, measuring how my responses changed as social pressure increased. The other team members would observe through a live stream, documenting my reactions and discussing my behavior in real time. The academic framing made everything seem reasonable, even beneficial. This was research that could advance understanding of media manipulation and audience psychology. My participation would contribute to studies that might eventually help people recognize and resist propaganda techniques. The work had genuine social value, and I was privileged to be part of it. I took my place in the observation chair, facing the cameras that would broadcast my responses to the research team. The lighting was professional but not uncomfortable, and the monitoring equipment was less intrusive than I'd expected. Dr. Mitchell explained that the session would last approximately 2 hours, during which I would be asked to respond to various scenarios while my psychological and physiological responses were measured. The first scenarios were straightforward, simple decision-making exercises designed to establish baseline measurements. I was asked to choose between different options, while the research team observed my thought processes. The discussions I could hear through speakers in the room were exactly what I'd participated in during previous sessions. Academic analysis of body language, stress indicators, decision-making patterns. But gradually, the scenarios became more personal. Instead of abstract choices, I was asked to discuss my own life, my fears, my ambitions. The research team's observations became more focused on my individual psychology rather than general human behavior. Their academic discussions started including specific details about my background that I hadn't provided during the initial questionnaires. That's when I began to realize something was wrong. The information they were discussing, details about my university course, my financial situation, my family background, hadn't come from anything I told them during the session. They knew about my student debt, my poor relationship with my parents, my lack of close friendships at university, information that could only have come from extensive research into my personal life. Dr. Mitchell noticed my growing discomfort and explained that background research was standard procedure for this type of psychological study. They needed to understand participants' motivational frameworks to properly analyze their responses. The information had been gathered through standard academic channels, student records, social media analysis, public databases. Nothing invasive, just the kind of background research that any legitimate study would require. But the academic observers' discussions were becoming less clinical and more personal. They talked about my loneliness, my desperation for intellectual connection, my willingness to do almost anything to feel part of a community that valued my contributions. Their analysis was accurate but felt invasive, like they were dissecting my personality for entertainment rather than scientific understanding. The scenarios they presented became increasingly uncomfortable. Instead of simple decision-making exercises, I was asked to discuss my deepest insecurities, my most embarrassing experiences, my greatest fears. The research team's observations became correspondingly more intimate, analyzing not just my responses, but my motivations, my psychological vulnerabilities, my desperate need for validation. When I expressed discomfort with the direction the session was taking, Dr. Mitchell assured me that this was normal. Psychological research often required participants to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. The temporary discomfort I was experiencing was necessary for the research to have genuine value. Backing out now would invalidate hours of preparation and waste the opportunity to contribute to important academic work. The pressure was subtle but persistent. They reminded me of how enthusiastic I'd been about participating, how much I'd valued being part of the research community, how disappointed they would be if I couldn't follow through on my commitment. The academic framing made my reluctance seem immature, unintellectual, as if I was prioritizing my personal comfort over scientific advancement. But the observers' discussions were becoming less about research and more about entertainment. They talked about my responses as if I was performing for their amusement, rather than contributing to academic study. Their analysis of my psychology became increasingly invasive, dissecting my personality with the kind of casual cruelty that had nothing to do with scientific methodology. That's when I realized that the academic observers weren't researchers or graduate students. They were paying customers, anonymous viewers who enjoyed watching real psychological manipulation presented as legitimate research. The sophisticated discussions, the academic credentials, the professional facility, all of it was elaborate theatre designed to make victims complicit in their own exploitation. I tried to leave, but Dr. Mitchell explained that the session wasn't complete. They'd invested significant resources in this research, and my participation was crucial for the data to have statistical validity. Leaving now would waste months of preparation and invalidate everything they'd learned. More importantly, I'd signed consent forms agreeing to participate in the full experimental protocol. The consent forms I'd signed so casually were more comprehensive than I'd realized. I'd agreed not just to participate in psychological research, but to continue until the academic objectives were met. I'd waived rights to withdraw consent during the session, acknowledging that temporary discomfort was necessary for legitimate research. I'd even agreed to confidentiality clauses that would prevent me from discussing the specific methodologies being used. The observers' discussions became openly predatory. They talked about how long I would resist, what it would take to break down my remaining psychological defenses, how much payment they were willing to make for specific responses. The academic pretense was dropped entirely, replaced by the casual cruelty of people who enjoyed watching others suffer. But I was still in the chair, facing cameras that broadcast my growing panic to anonymous viewers who were betting on my psychological breakdown. The professional lighting that had seemed so legitimate now felt harsh, clinical, designed to capture every detail of my distress for the entertainment of people I would never see. Dr. Mitchell continued to frame everything in academic terms, but her explanations became increasingly hollow. This was research into psychological resilience, she insisted. My responses were providing valuable data about stress management and social compliance. The temporary discomfort I was experiencing was necessary for the advancement of human understanding. The session continued for hours. Psychological pressure disguised as research methodology, invasive questioning presented as scientific inquiry, deliberate humiliation framed as academic observation. The anonymous viewers discussed my responses with the detached interest of people watching a particularly engaging television program, placing bets on how long I would maintain my composure. I don't remember exactly how I got away. The details are blurred by stress and the psychological manipulation I'd endured. I think there was some kind of technical problem with the streaming equipment, a brief moment when the observers were distracted, and I managed to leave the chair and find the exit. Or maybe Dr. Mitchell simply decided the session had provided enough entertainment for the paying viewers. I found myself on a Manchester street with no clear memory of how I'd gotten there. The business district looked normal, professional, exactly like somewhere legitimate research might be conducted. But I knew now that the building I'd just left was something else entirely. A facility designed to exploit people's desire for intellectual connection and academic validation. The journey back to Leeds was a blur. I sat on the train staring out the window, trying to process what had happened. The academic discussions I'd found so engaging, the research community I'd felt so privileged to join, the intellectual validation I'd craved so desperately. All of it had been designed to make me complicit in my own exploitation. That was 8 months ago. I've never reported what happened. Who would believe that a legitimate-seeming research facility was actually a sophisticated operation designed to exploit curious students? The academic credentials seemed real. The facility was professional, and I'd participated voluntarily after signing consent forms that probably covered every legal requirement. But I've learned to recognize the signs now. The casual invitations to observe research, the flattery about academic insight, the gradual escalation from observer to participant. The same patterns that led me into that room are being used to recruit other people, other students, who are bored and lonely and desperate for intellectual connection. I still get invitations occasionally, from different usernames on different platforms. Always the same academic framing, the same promise of authentic research opportunities. I delete them immediately, but I can't delete the knowledge that somewhere out there people are still being recruited for research projects that have nothing to do with advancing human understanding. The flat in Headingley feels different now. The thin walls and broken heating that once seemed like minor inconveniences now feel like vulnerabilities. I've changed my daily routines, varied my schedule, become more careful about what personal information I share online. But sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet and I'm lying awake listening to footsteps in the corridor, I wonder if they know where I live. Because the thing about that kind of operation is that they don't just exploit you once and move on. They build profiles, gather information, create detailed psychological assessments that could be valuable for future projects. I was part of their research for months before I became a subject, and they learned everything they needed to know about what motivates me, what frightens me, what I'm willing to do for validation and intellectual connection. The academic community I thought I'd found doesn't exist. Real research happens in universities with proper oversight and ethical guidelines. But the desire for intellectual connection, for being part of something important and meaningful, is real enough. And there are people who understand how to exploit that desire, how to make isolation and boredom feel like academic opportunity. I'm finishing my degree this year, though media communications feels even more pointless now than it did before. The theoretical frameworks we study in lectures seem naive compared to what I've learned about psychological manipulation and social engineering. But I've also learned that the real world is full of people who understand human psychology better than any university course could teach. The chair is still out there somewhere, in a professional-looking facility with academic credentials and research equipment. And they're still recruiting participants, still finding people who are bored enough and lonely enough and desperate enough for intellectual validation to sign consent forms they don't fully understand. Sometimes I think about the young man I observed during my first session, the volunteer who thought he was participating in standard psychological research. I wonder if he ever realized what was really happening, if he managed to leave before they asked him to become a regular participant, if he's somewhere now checking logs and listening for footsteps and wondering if those casual invitations he receives are what they claim to be. Because once you've been in that chair, once you felt those cameras capturing every detail of your psychological breakdown for the entertainment of anonymous viewers, you never really feel safe again. The academic pretense might be dropped, the session might end, but the knowledge that there are people out there who enjoy watching human suffering remains. I remember it perfectly, the way my hands shook when I first saw the invitation. Not from fear, mind you, but from pure excitement. Finally, after months of searching through dead links and forum posts that led nowhere, I'd found something real, something that might actually prove that the stories were true. At 17, I was obsessed with urban legends, not the obvious ones that everyone knew, Bloody Mary, the vanishing hitchhiker, that sort of nonsense. I was interested in the modern myths, the digital folklore that had grown up around the internet's darker corners. Stories about hidden websites where you could watch live murders, chat rooms where people planned real crimes, streaming services that broadcast things no civilized society should ever see. My mates thought I was mental, spending my evenings trawling through obscure forums and following breadcrumb trails that usually led to nothing but rickrolls and dead ends. But I knew there had to be something out there, The internet was too vast, too unregulated for these stories to be completely made up. Somewhere in the depths of the dark web, real horrors were happening, and I was determined to find them. The breakthrough came during the summer holidays before my final year at sixth form. My parents had gone to Spain for a fortnight, leaving me alone in our house in Kettering with strict instructions to revise for my A-levels and not throw any parties. Instead, I spent every waking hour diving deeper into corners of the internet I'd never explored before. I'd been using privacy tools for months by then, learned about them from a forum dedicated to internet mysteries. The dark web wasn't as scary as people made it out to be. Mostly just forums and marketplaces that looked like they'd been designed in the 90s. But there were layers beneath the obvious stuff. Communities that required invitations and references to access. The invitation arrived through a private message on an obscure forum about digital anthropology. The sender's username was just a string of random characters, and their profile showed they'd only joined the day before. The message was short, almost casual. They'd noticed my posts about online myths and wondered if I'd be interested in observing something authentic. A research project, they called it, studying human behavior in controlled environments. They included a link to a private chat room and a time. That night at 11:30. No explanation of what I'd be observing or why they'd chosen me specifically. Just an invitation to witness something most people would never see. I should have been suspicious. I should have realized that legitimate researchers don't recruit random teenagers from internet forums. But at 17, the possibility of finally seeing something real, something that would prove all those urban legends had a basis in fact, was too tempting to ignore. The chat room was simple, just a basic interface with a list of active users and a message window. When I connected at the appointed time, there were already 8 people online. They welcomed me warmly, asking where I was from and how I'd heard about the research project. Everyone seemed friendly, genuinely interested in my background and what had brought me to the dark web in the first place. The conversation was surprisingly normal. People discussed university courses, summer jobs, films they'd watched recently. Someone mentioned they were studying psychology at Manchester. Another person talked about their gap year travels. They could have been any group of young people chatting online, except for the undercurrent of anticipation that ran through every exchange. Around midnight, a new user joined, the same random character string who'd invited me. They thanked everyone for participating and explained that tonight's session would be particularly interesting. They'd arranged for us to observe a live demonstration of psychological pressure techniques, something that would help us understand how people responded to stress in controlled situations. A new window opened in my browser, showing what appeared to be a small, windowless room with concrete walls. A single chair sat in the center, facing multiple cameras. The lighting was harsh, clinical, like something from a hospital or laboratory. It looked exactly like the red rooms described in all those urban legends, except there was nothing obviously sinister about it, just an empty room with professional-looking equipment. The chat exploded with excitement. Everyone seemed genuinely thrilled to be witnessing what they called a breakthrough in behavioral research. They discussed the camera angles, the lighting setup, the professional quality of the production. It felt academic, scientific, like we were part of something important rather than something wrong. Then someone entered the room. It was a young man, probably not much older than me, wearing casual clothes and looking confused about where he was. He examined the chair, the cameras, the concrete walls with growing bewilderment. The researcher who'd invited us explained through the chat that this was a volunteer who'd agreed to participate in the study. though the specific nature of the experiment had been kept confidential to ensure authentic responses. The other viewers began making observations about the subject's behavior, noting his body language and facial expressions with the detached interest of psychology students. They discussed his apparent anxiety levels, speculated about his background, made predictions about how he would respond to different stimuli. I found myself caught up in their enthusiasm. This was exactly what I'd been searching for. Proof that the internet's hidden corners contained genuine research, real experiments that pushed the boundaries of what was considered ethical. The academic tone of the discussion made everything feel legitimate, important, like we were witnessing something that would advance human understanding. The volunteer was asked to sit in the chair. Through the chat, the researcher explained that they would be testing various psychological pressure techniques, measuring how quickly social isolation and peer pressure could influence decision-making. The cameras would record everything for later analysis by university research teams. What followed was subtle at first. The volunteer was asked simple questions through speakers we couldn't see, his answers recorded by the cameras from multiple angles. The chat observers discussed his responses, noting signs of stress or discomfort, predicting how long it would take for the isolation to affect his mental state. But gradually, the atmosphere in the chat began to shift. The academic discussion became more personal, more focused on the individual rather than the research. People started making comments about the volunteer's appearance, his nervousness, the way he kept looking at the cameras as if seeking help that wasn't coming. Someone suggested that the experiment would be more effective with multiple subjects. The researcher agreed, explaining that they'd been hoping to expand the study, but had struggled to find suitable volunteers. The work was too important to abandon, they said, and the insights they were gaining were invaluable. That's when they asked if any of us would be interested in participating directly. The request was casual, almost offhand. They'd learned so much from observing our reactions in the chat, the researcher explained, that having one of us experience the experiment firsthand would provide crucial comparative data. It would only take a few hours, and participants would be contributing to groundbreaking research into human psychology. The other chat users immediately began encouraging me to volunteer. They said I'd shown the most insight during the observation, that my comments had demonstrated a real understanding of the psychological principles at work. The researcher agreed, noting that my posts on the forum had shown exceptional maturity for someone my age. I felt flattered, chosen. These people, who seemed so knowledgeable and sophisticated, were telling me I had something special to offer. The volunteer in the room was clearly finding the experience difficult, but that was the point. Real research required genuine responses, and I would be helping advance scientific understanding in ways most people never could. The arrangements were surprisingly simple. They would send a car to collect me the following evening. The session would take place at a research facility in Birmingham, not far from where I lived. I would be driven home afterwards, and my participation would remain completely confidential. They even mentioned a small payment for my time, though they stressed that the real reward would be the knowledge that I'd contributed to important academic work. I agreed without really thinking it through. The combination of flattery, peer pressure, and genuine curiosity overrode any sensible concerns I might have had. These people seemed legitimate, professional, interested in real research rather than anything sinister. And after months of searching for authentic mysteries, the chance to be part of something genuine was impossible to resist. The car arrived exactly when they'd said it would. A black saloon with tinted windows, driven by a middle-aged man who seemed pleasant enough. He didn't talk much during the journey, just confirmed my name and explained that we'd be arriving at the facility within the hour. But as we drove through Birmingham's outskirts, I began to notice things that didn't feel right. The route we were taking didn't lead to any university campus or research facility I was familiar with. Instead, we seemed to be heading towards an industrial area full of warehouses and abandoned factories. When I asked about our destination, the driver just smiled and said we'd be there soon. The research facility was deliberately located away from populated areas, he explained, to ensure complete privacy for sensitive experiments. Academic ethics required absolute confidentiality, especially when dealing with cutting-edge psychological research. We pulled up outside a nondescript warehouse with no signs or identifying features. Just a building that could have contained anything, surrounded by empty car parks and darkened windows. The driver led me to a side entrance and used a key card to let us in. Inside, the warehouse had been converted into something that looked more like a television studio than a research facility. Professional lighting equipment, multiple cameras, and in the center of the space, a small concrete room with a single chair facing the cameras. The same room I'd been watching through my computer screen the night before. That's when I realized that the friendly chat room observers, the academic researcher, the volunteer I'd watched with such detached interest, none of it had been real. Or rather, it had been real, but not in the way I'd understood. I hadn't been observing a research project. I'd been watching an audition. The other people were already there, waiting. The same usernames from the chat room, but now revealed as ordinary-looking adults with cameras and recording equipment. They greeted me with the same friendly enthusiasm they'd shown online, explaining that everything was set up for tonight's session. I was the volunteer now, the one who would sit in the chair while others watched and discuss my responses with academic detachment. Except there was nothing academic about it, and the people observing weren't psychology students or researchers. They were just people who enjoyed watching others in distress. The transition happened so gradually that I didn't immediately recognize it as coercion. They asked if I wanted to see the setup, if I was curious about how the equipment worked, whether I'd like to experience the same experiment I'd found so fascinating the night before. Their tone remained friendly, encouraging, as if this was all part of the natural progression from observer to participant. But when I said I'd changed my mind, that I wanted to go home, their demeanor shifted. Not dramatically. They didn't become threatening or aggressive. Instead, they became disappointed, as if I was letting down the team after they'd invested so much time and effort in bringing me there. They reminded me of how enthusiastic I'd been the night before, how much insight I'd shown into the psychological principles at work. They'd specifically chosen me, they said, because I'd demonstrated such maturity and understanding. Backing out now would ruin months of preparation and waste the opportunity to contribute to something genuinely important. The peer pressure was subtle but relentless. They made me feel selfish for wanting to leave, ungrateful for the opportunity I'd been given, immature for not following through on my commitment. And always, underlying everything, was the implication that I didn't really have a choice anymore. I'd come there voluntarily, they pointed out. I'd agreed to participate in the research. I'd been driven to a location I couldn't identify, with people whose real names I didn't know, who would believe that I'd been coerced if I tried to report what was happening. The chair sat in the center of the room, surrounded by cameras and lights, waiting for me to take my place. They assured me it would only take a few hours, that thousands of people online were waiting to observe the session, that my participation would provide valuable insights into human psychology. But I knew now that the people watching wouldn't be interested in academic research. They would be paying customers, anonymous viewers, who enjoyed watching real fear and genuine distress. The urban legends I'd spent months trying to prove were real, and I was about to become part of one. That was 3 months ago. I never sat in the chair, managed to get away when the driver stepped outside for a cigarette break and left the warehouse door unlocked. I ran through unfamiliar streets until I found a main road and flagged down a taxi. Made it home before my parents returned from their holiday. I've never reported what happened. Who would believe that I'd stumbled into a real Red Room operation while searching for urban legends? The police would think I was making it up, or worse, that I'd been involved in something I shouldn't have been. But sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I wonder about that chair, whether it's still there, in that converted warehouse in Birmingham's industrial district, whether other teenagers, drawn by the same curiosity that nearly destroyed me, are discovering friendly chat rooms and academic research projects that promise to show them something real. And I wonder whether any of them are smart enough to run when they realize what they've actually found. The invitation messages still arrive occasionally, from different usernames on different forums. Always the same casual tone, the same promise of authentic observation opportunities. I delete them immediately now, but I can't delete the knowledge that somewhere out there the chair is waiting. Have you ever wondered what happens to the parts of yourself you lose in war? Not the obvious bits, the limbs, the hearing, the scars you can see in the mirror. I'm talking about the invisible pieces, the ability to sleep through the night without checking the locks 3 times, the capacity to sit in a restaurant without your back to the wall, the simple faith that most people are fundamentally decent. Those are the parts that don't grow back, no matter how many therapy sessions the doctors threw at you. I came back from Afghanistan in late 2018, medically discharged after an IED took out half my patrol and left me with a collection of metal fragments in my left leg and a head full of memories I couldn't switch off. The physical therapy was straightforward enough. Learn to walk properly again, build up the strength, adapt to the new limitations. The mental side was trickier. The flat they set me up with in Aldershot was decent enough. Ground floor, which suited the leg, and quiet neighbours who minded their own business. The occupational therapist had been very pleased with herself when she'd arranged it. Close to the base for support, she'd said, but far enough away to feel civilian. What she hadn't mentioned was how the silence would press against your ears at night, or how every settling beam and creaking pipe would send your heart racing. Sleep became something that happened to other people. I'd lie there listening to the world outside my window. The occasional car, a fox in the bins, the milk float doing its rounds at 4:30. Sometimes I'd doze off around dawn, only to wake up an hour later feeling worse than when I'd gone to bed. That's how I discovered the internet had a whole world that came alive when the rest of Britain was asleep. Forums for insomniacs, chat rooms for shift workers, communities of people who existed in the margins of normal daylight hours. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just human contact that didn't require explaining why I was awake at 3 a.m. or why crowds made me nervous. The transition from regular internet to the darker corners happened gradually. Someone in an insomnia forum mentioned privacy tools, ways to browse without leaving digital footprints. Given my background, the concept of operational security appealed to me. Old habits, I suppose. In the army, you learn to cover your tracks, to move without being seen, to gather intelligence without revealing your position. Installing Tor felt like putting on body armor, that same sense of protection, of creating barriers between yourself and potential threats. The dark web wasn't what I'd expected. Less criminal marketplace, more like a parallel internet where people could speak freely about things that wouldn't be tolerated on Facebook or Twitter. Political dissidents, whistleblowers, people living under authoritarian regimes. It felt purposeful, almost noble. The first few weeks I just observed. Reading forums about government surveillance, privacy rights, digital freedom. There was something therapeutic about it. Being part of a community that understood the value of staying hidden, of operating below the radar. These people got it in a way that civilian therapists never could. It was in one of these privacy forums that I first heard about red rooms, not from someone promoting them, but from a discussion about online myths and digital urban legends. Someone had posted a long thread debunking various dark web horror stories, explaining how most of the sensational stuff you read in newspapers was either exaggerated or completely fabricated. Red rooms, according to this poster, were particularly ridiculous. The technical challenges alone made them impractical. Streaming live video over Tor was unreliable, the latency was terrible, and the bandwidth requirements were enormous. More importantly, they argued, the risk to reward ratio made no sense. Why would criminals expose themselves to that level of surveillance and law enforcement attention when there were easier ways to make money? The post was thorough, well-researched, and completely convincing. It also had the unintended effect of making me curious about whether they actually existed. I told myself it was just intellectual curiosity. After years of intelligence work, you develop a natural skepticism about official narratives. When someone tells you something is impossible, your first instinct is to test that assertion. Not because you want to find something horrific, but because you want to understand how the world actually works, rather than how people say it works. The search took weeks. Most of the links I found led to obvious scams, sites demanding payment upfront or requiring personal information that any sensible person would never provide. Others were clearly honey traps, probably run by law enforcement agencies trying to catch people with questionable intentions. But occasionally, buried deep in technical discussions or hidden in the metadata of seemingly unrelated files, I'd find references that seemed more genuine. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I'd been helping out at a veteran support group, not talking, just making tea and setting up chairs, when I overheard a conversation between two ex-Signals operators about online payment systems. They were discussing the profit margins on different digital services, and one of them mentioned that the real money wasn't in legitimate businesses, but in providing services that people couldn't get through normal channels. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. But something about the way he'd said it stuck with me. The next time I was browsing the dark web, I started looking at it differently. Instead of searching for red rooms directly, I started following the money, payment processors, digital transfer systems, the financial infrastructure that would be needed to support something like live streaming to paying customers. That's how I found the marketplace. It was hidden several layers deep, accessible only through a series of referral links that changed daily. The front page looked like any other dark web market. Drugs, fake documents, stolen credit card details. But there was a section marked Premium Services that required additional verification to access. The verification process was more thorough than anything I'd encountered. Not just prepayment through untraceable methods, but proof of identity that had to be cross-referenced against previous purchases, references from existing members, even a brief interview conducted through encrypted chat to confirm you weren't law enforcement. It took nearly a month to get approved, and by the time I did, I wasn't sure I actually wanted access anymore. But the same compulsion that had carried me through 3 tours in Afghanistan, the need to see a mission through to completion, kept me going. The premium services section was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 30 or 40 listings, mostly for things that were disturbing, but not particularly surprising. Custom pornography, identity theft services, professional harassment campaigns, the sort of services that existed in the grey areas between legal and illegal, catering to people with money and flexible morals. The listings that interested me were at the bottom of the page in a subcategory marked Live Entertainment. 3 different providers, each offering real-time streaming services with interactive elements. The descriptions were deliberately vague. Authentic experiences, unscripted content, viewer participation opportunities. But the prices gave them away. These weren't webcam shows or adult entertainment. They were charging thousands of pounds for single sessions. I spent another week researching the providers before making contact with one. Their listing claimed to offer documentary-style content featuring real participants in authentic scenarios. The language was careful, designed to provide plausible deniability while making the actual service clear to interested buyers. The booking process was surprisingly professional. Encrypted email exchanges, detailed technical requirements for viewing, even a customer service representative who walked me through the setup process. They operated like a legitimate business, complete with scheduling systems and technical support. The session was arranged for a Tuesday night at 11:30. I was provided with a unique link and access credentials that would only work during a specific 2-hour window. The technical requirements were extensive: updated browsers, specific security plugins, a reliable internet connection with minimum bandwidth requirements. When the time came, I almost didn't connect. I sat at my laptop for nearly 20 minutes, cursor hovering over the link, trying to decide if I really wanted to see what I was about to see. In the end, it was the same morbid curiosity that had carried me this far. I needed to know if it was real. The stream loaded slowly, buffering every few seconds as the encrypted video fought its way through Tor's layered network. When it finally stabilized, I was looking at what appeared to be a basement or cellar. Concrete walls, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and a chair positioned in the center of the frame. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just an empty room with occasionally flickering lighting. As the video quality adjusted, I was beginning to think I'd been scammed when a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. It was a man in his 40s or 50s, wearing coveralls and latex gloves. He moved methodically around the room, checking equipment I couldn't quite see, adjusting the camera angle, preparing for something. His movements were practiced, professional. This wasn't his first time doing whatever he was about to do. A chat window had appeared beside the video player, showing messages from other viewers. There weren't many, maybe 8 or 10 people total, but they were clearly regulars. They talked about previous sessions, compared notes on different providers, discussed technical aspects of the streaming quality like they were reviewing a television program. Then someone else entered the room. She was young, probably early 20s, and clearly confused about where she was or how she'd gotten there. The man in coveralls guided her to the chair with gentle but firm insistence, speaking to her in what appeared to be a calming manner. She kept looking around the room, taking in the concrete walls and bare bulb and camera equipment with growing alarm. The chat exploded with activity. Viewers were making requests, placing bets, discussing what they wanted to see happen next. Payment details were being shared. Transactions were being arranged in real time. I watched in horrified fascination as what I was witnessing transformed from documentary into auction. I should have closed the browser, should have reported what I was seeing to the police, though I had no idea how to explain how I'd found it, or whether they'd even believe me. Instead, I found myself paralyzed by the same terrible fascination that had carried me through firefights in Helmand, that state of hyper-awareness where time slows down and you observe everything with crystalline clarity while being unable to act. The man in coveralls began responding to specific requests from the chat. He would pause, read something on a screen I couldn't see, then nod or shake his head. Sometimes he would hold up different tools for the camera, letting the viewers choose which one he should use. It was interactive in the most disturbing way possible. A live-streamed crime where the audience was complicit in every decision. Then something changed. The chat messages stopped, replaced by a single repeated warning from multiple users. Terminate session, terminate session, terminate session. The man in coveralls looked directly at the camera, his expression shifting from professional calm to genuine alarm. He moved quickly to something off screen, and seconds later the video cut out entirely. I stared at a blank screen, showing only a connection error message. When I tried to reload the page, the link was dead. The entire marketplace had vanished, as if it had never existed at all. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that what I'd witnessed had been staged. Elaborate theatre designed to part fools from their money. The production quality had been too professional, the interactive elements too seamless. Real criminals wouldn't operate with such sophisticated customer service and technical infrastructure. But I kept thinking about those final moments before the feed cut out. The way the man's expression had changed when he'd seen those warning messages. The speed with which everything had shut down. It felt less like a performance ending and more like an emergency evacuation. 3 weeks later, I received a package. It arrived by regular post, addressed to my flat with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, printed on ordinary paper with a home printer. It showed the interior of my living room, taken from the position of my laptop screen. I was visible in the background, sitting at my kitchen table, clearly recognizable despite the low light. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a single line in neat handwriting. "We know what you watched." I called the police immediately, reported the break-in, showed them the photograph, explained about the package. But what could they do? No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, no way to trace where the photograph had come from. The officer who took my statement was polite, but clearly thought I was either paranoid or making it up. I've changed the logs 3 times since then, installed security cameras, motion sensors, even hired a private investigator to check if anyone had been asking questions about me. Nothing. Whoever had been in my flat had left no trace beyond that single photograph. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying awake, listening to the sounds of the building settling around me, I wonder if they ever really left. Because the thing about surveillance is that once you know you're being watched, you never stop feeling those eyes on you. I still get packages occasionally, never more than once a month, always delivered by regular post. Sometimes it's another photograph, my kitchen, my bedroom, the view from my living room window. Once it was a printout of my medical records from the army. Last month it was a copy of my therapy notes from the NHS. Each one carries the same message on the back. We know what you watched. I don't know if it's a threat or just a reminder. I don't know if they want something from me, or if they're simply ensuring I remember what I witnessed. But I've learned that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The worst part isn't the invasion of privacy, or even the constant feeling of being monitored. It's knowing that somewhere out there, that basement with the concrete walls and single bare bulb might still be operating. That other people might be sitting at their computers right now, watching live streams of things that should never happen, placing bets on human suffering like it's a sporting event. And I'm the only one who knows it's real. At least, I hope I'm the only one. Have you ever been in the situation where you do something seemingly normal, something routine, and it completely changes your life? I'm curious, what would you do if you took your laptop in for a simple repair and end up discovering that the ordinary-looking guy in the computer shop is involved in things that would make your worst nightmares seem tame? That the person fixing your webcam issue has been using that same webcam to watch you for months? I work as a teaching assistant at a primary school in Coventry. There's nothing particularly exciting about my life. I help 7-year-olds with their reading, supervise playtime, and assist the main teachers with various administrative tasks. The pay isn't brilliant, but I enjoy working with children and the holidays are decent. Last autumn, my laptop started acting up. The webcam would activate randomly, the little green light flickering on for a few seconds before switching off again. Sometimes I'd catch it happening while I was using the computer. Other times I'd notice it had been on when I returned from making tea or using the bathroom. Initially, I assumed it was a software glitch. Ran virus scans, updated drivers, tried all the usual troubleshooting steps you find online. Nothing worked. If anything, the problem seemed to be getting worse. The camera would activate more frequently, sometimes staying on for several minutes at a time. Eventually, I decided to take it to a local repair shop. The place was called Digital Solutions and occupied a narrow storefront between a charity shop and a kebab restaurant. I'd walked past it hundreds of times but never really noticed it before. The kind of business that blends into the background of everyday urban life. The owner was a middle-aged man named Trevor, who seemed knowledgeable about computers and quoted reasonable prices for the repair work. He explained that webcam issues were common, usually caused by corrupted drivers or malware infections. Said he'd need to keep the laptop for a few days to run comprehensive diagnostics and clean up the system. I dropped it off on a Wednesday morning and was told it would be ready by the weekend. Trevor provided a receipt and assured me that all customer data would remain private and secure during the repair process. That evening, I realized how much I relied on my laptop for basic activities, checking emails, browsing social media, watching streaming services before bed. Without it, I found myself with unexpectedly free time and nothing particular to do with it. On Thursday evening, I decided to walk past the shop to see if it was still open. The storefront was dark, but I could see light coming from what appeared to be a back office or workshop area. Trevor was working late, presumably fixing computers like mine. As I walked past, something caught my attention. Through the window, I could see multiple computer screens displaying what looked like video feeds. Not the typical desktop view you'd expect from computer repair work, but actual video streams showing various rooms and locations. I slowed down to get a better look, trying to appear casual while examining what was visible through the window. The video feeds showed different domestic spaces, bedrooms, living rooms, home offices. Most appeared to be empty, though a few showed people going about their normal evening routines. My first thought was that Trevor might be running some sort of security monitoring service alongside his computer repair business. Many small business owners take on multiple revenue streams to make ends meet. Nothing particularly suspicious about that. But something felt off about what I was seeing. The camera angles were wrong for professional security installations. Too intimate, too focused on private spaces rather than entry points or valuable items. These looked more like hidden cameras than security systems. I continued walking, but the image of those video feeds stayed with me. That night, I found myself wondering about my own laptop, about the webcam issues I'd been experiencing, about how long Trevor had been aware of the problem before I brought the computer to his shop. On Friday, I called to check on the repair progress. Trevor said the work was taking longer than expected, that he'd discovered more extensive malware infections than initially apparent. He'd need the weekend to complete the cleaning process, but the laptop would definitely be ready by Monday. This gave me an excuse to walk past the shop again Friday evening. Same pattern as the night before, dark storefront, lights in the back office, multiple screens displaying video feeds of domestic spaces. This time, I counted at least 6 different feeds visible through the window. One of them showed a young woman in what appeared to be her bedroom, getting ready for bed. The camera angle suggested it was positioned somewhere high up, possibly hidden in a ceiling fixture or ventilation grate. She had no idea she was being watched. Another feed showed a family watching television in their living room. 2 adults, 3 children, completely unaware that their private evening was being broadcast to Trevor's monitoring setup. The camera quality was good enough to make out facial features and read text on the television screen. I realized I was looking at a surveillance operation, not a security service. These were people being watched without their knowledge or consent, probably through compromised webcams in devices they'd brought to Trevor for repair, devices like my laptop. When I collected my computer on Monday, Trevor was friendly and professional, explained that he'd removed several malware infections and updated all the security software, said the webcam issues should be completely resolved, and provided documentation of all the work he'd performed. I paid the repair fee and took the laptop home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the entire situation. That evening, I covered the webcam with electrical tape and began researching how to detect covert surveillance software. The diagnostic tools I downloaded found several programs I didn't recognize, applications that weren't listed in the standard software inventory, but were definitely present on the system. Most appeared to be related to remote access and file sharing, the kind of software that could allow someone to control a computer from a distance. I spent the next several days learning about digital forensics, about how to trace network connections and monitor system activity. What I discovered was disturbing. My laptop was regularly connecting to IP addresses I didn't recognize, uploading small amounts of data at consistent intervals. The connection logs showed that these uploads had been happening for months, long before I'd taken the computer to Trevor for repair. But the frequency and volume of data transfer had increased significantly since getting the laptop back from his shop. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of the network activity, records of the suspicious software installations, photos of Trevor's shop taken from the street. Built a comprehensive file of evidence, though I wasn't sure what I planned to do with it. That's when I decided to investigate Trevor's operation more thoroughly. Started walking past his shop at different times, observing patterns in his work schedule and customer traffic. Noticed that he seemed to specialize in devices with cameras, laptops, tablets, smartphones with front-facing cameras. Most of his customers appeared to be ordinary people dealing with routine technical problems. Students with slow computers, parents with virus-infected family laptops, elderly people who'd accidentally installed malicious software, all of them trusting Trevor to fix their problems and protect their privacy. One evening, I saw something that changed my understanding of what Trevor was actually running. Through the back office window, I could see him interacting with what appeared to be a live streaming interface. Multiple video feeds were active, but now there was chat functionality alongside the video streams. People were watching the feeds and commenting in real time. Not just watching, but requesting specific actions or camera angles. Trevor was responding to these requests, apparently controlling which feeds were visible and how the surveillance was conducted. This wasn't just unauthorized monitoring. This was a commercial operation, selling access to private surveillance footage to paying customers around the world. I recognized one of the video feeds immediately. It showed a bedroom that looked exactly like mine, filmed from the angle where my laptop usually sat on the dresser. The electrical tape I'd placed over the webcam was visible in the corner of the frame, but the camera was somehow still transmitting video from inside my flat. Trevor had installed multiple surveillance devices during the repair process. The webcam issue I'd originally brought to him was probably his doing in the first place, a way to identify potential surveillance targets and get access to their devices. I left the area immediately and went home to search my flat thoroughly. Found a tiny camera hidden in the smoke detector above my bed, another one built into what looked like a standard electrical outlet near my desk. Professional installations, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. The devices were connected to my home Wi-Fi network, probably configured during Trevor's access to my laptop and password information. They'd been broadcasting footage of my private life to his streaming platform for weeks, maybe months. I documented everything with my phone camera, then carefully removed the surveillance devices without damaging them, kept them as evidence, along with all the digital forensics information I'd gathered about the compromised laptop. But when I tried to report the situation to police, I encountered a problem I hadn't anticipated. The officers I spoke with seemed knowledgeable about traditional crimes, but struggled to understand the technical aspects of what I was describing. Digital surveillance, dark web streaming platforms, cryptocurrency payment systems. It was outside their normal area of expertise. They took my statement and collected the physical evidence, but explained that investigating this type of cybercrime would require specialist resources that might not be available immediately. Said they'd be in touch once they'd consulted with their digital forensics team. That was 4 months ago. I've heard nothing back from police, and Trevor's shop is still operating normally. Same storefront, same repair services, same trusting customers bringing their camera-equipped devices to be fixed. I moved to a different flat across town, replaced all my electronic devices, took comprehensive security precautions to prevent future surveillance. But moving doesn't change what you know, and the knowledge of what Trevor is doing follows me through every ordinary day. The worst part isn't knowing that I was watched without consent. The worst part is understanding how many other people are probably being watched right now. People who trust their local computer repair shop to fix their problems and protect their privacy. Trevor's operation depends on that trust, on people like me who need technical help and assume that small business owners are fundamentally honest. On the invisibility that comes with running a boring, everyday service that nobody pays much attention to. I've started noticing other computer repair shops around the city, wondering how many of them might be running similar operations. How many ordinary-looking technicians are actually surveillance entrepreneurs, selling access to private footage through dark web streaming platforms. Sometimes I wonder if reporting Trevor to police was the right decision. or if I should have tried to expose his operation through other means: media attention, social media campaigns, direct warnings to his potential victims. But all of these approaches would require evidence that I'm not sure I could provide without admitting to my own illegal surveillance of his activities. That's the genius of operations like Trevor's. They create witnesses who are bound by their own complicity, people who can't report what they've seen without acknowledging their own borderline criminal behavior. I've never told anyone else about this experience. Not colleagues, not friends, not family members. What would I say? That my computer repair guy was running a surveillance operation and I discovered it by spying on his business. That I removed hidden cameras from my own flat but can't prove where they came from. But I'm telling you now, and I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because the weight of keeping it secret has become too much. Maybe because sharing it might somehow make it less real, less immediate, less present in my daily thoughts. Or maybe because I've started to suspect that creating witnesses was always part of Trevor's business model. That people like me who discover what he's doing are meant to discover it. Meant to carry the knowledge forward through stories that can never be properly verified. Maybe the real product isn't just the surveillance footage, but the awareness that such surveillance is possible. The understanding that any electronic device could be compromised, that any repair technician could be more than they appear to be. Trevor is still operating his shop, still fixing computers and installing surveillance equipment, still running his streaming platform for customers around the world. And somewhere in Coventry, other people are probably walking past his storefront right now, thinking about getting their webcam issues fixed by a friendly, knowledgeable local businessman. Maybe by telling you this, I'm doing exactly what Trevor's operation requires to survive and spread. Creating awareness, planting seeds of paranoia, making people more conscious of the surveillance possibilities that exist in their ordinary digital lives. Maybe that's how these things work. Not just through the technical infrastructure of hidden cameras and streaming platforms, but through the social infrastructure of witnesses who carry the knowledge forward, who ensure that the awareness of such possibilities becomes part of the general consciousness. I still work at the primary school, still help children with their reading, still live a fundamentally ordinary life. But now I understand that ordinary life exists alongside operations like Trevor's, that the surface of everyday business conceals activities that most people never imagine are happening. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my new flat with my new laptop, I find myself wondering if Trevor was really working alone, or if he was part of something larger. A network of repair shops and surveillance operations, all feeding content to the same streaming platforms, all serving the same global audience of people who pay to watch strangers in their most private moments. That might be the most disturbing possibility of all. Not that one creepy computer repair guy was running a surveillance operation, but that such operations are common enough to sustain entire industries, entire ecosystems of people who make their living by violating the privacy of ordinary people who just needed their laptops fixed. I used to think I was lucky to find that flat. Coventry isn't exactly known for affordable housing with decent views, but somehow I'd managed to secure a one-bedroom on the 9th floor of Blackthorn Heights for less than the going rate. The letting agent mentioned something about the building's transitional phase and how they were trying to cultivate the right community atmosphere. At the time, I just nodded along, mentally calculating how much I'd save compared to my previous place. The building itself was one of those structures that seems to exist in every British city. Built in the late 70s, briefly fashionable, then sliding into disrepair before being regenerated, with a fresh coat of paint and some potted plants in the lobby. 22 floors of identical windows stacked in a perfect grid, the kind of place where you could live for years without ever knowing your neighbors. I moved in during that strange liminal week between Christmas and New Year's, when the world feels suspended in time. The corridors were eerily quiet as I carried my boxes up from the moving van. I remember being struck by how clean everything was. No scuff marks on the walls, no lingering cooking smells, none of the usual signs of human habitation you'd expect in a building housing hundreds of people. My flat was perfectly adequate. Open-plan kitchen and living area. Bedroom just large enough for my double bed. Bathroom with surprisingly good water pressure. The previous tenant had left it immaculate, which should have been a relief, but somehow felt unsettling, like all traces of their existence had been methodically erased. The first couple of weeks passed uneventfully as I settled into a routine. I'd leave for work at 8 a.m., return around 6 p.m., occasionally glimpsing other residents in the lifts or lobby. Everyone kept to themselves, offering nothing more than a brief nod if our eyes happened to meet. I initially chalked it up to typical British reserve, perhaps amplified by urban living. It was the silence that first struck me as odd. I'd lived in flats before and was accustomed to the ambient soundtrack of shared living. Muffled conversations, television sounds bleeding through walls, footsteps overhead. But Blackthorn Heights existed in a perpetual state of hushed quiet, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Then came the first peculiarity that I couldn't simply rationalize away. I was returning home late one Friday night, slightly tipsy from after-work drinks, when the lift stopped at the 13th floor. This confused me momentarily, as I distinctly remembered the building jumping from 12 to 14, like many high-rises do because of superstition. Yet here was the number 13, illuminated on the panel. When the doors opened, I was struck by the difference in atmosphere. The corridor looked similar in layout, but was finished to a noticeably higher standard. Recessed lighting instead of fluorescence. What appeared to be actual hardwood flooring rather than laminate. Walls painted a deep burgundy instead of the institutional cream on my floor. Before I could process this properly, a man in a dark suit entered, nodded curtly, and stood with his back to me. The doors closed, and we continued upward in silence. I convinced myself I'd been mistaken about the floor numbering, that I'd simply never noticed the 13th floor before. But the following morning, I checked as I descended in the lift, and sure enough, the buttons jumped from 12 to 14. The 13th floor button was simply absent. I might have dismissed the whole thing as alcohol-induced confusion, if not for what happened the following week. Unable to sleep one night, I decided to take out my rubbish, more as an excuse to walk around than out of necessity. The building had a chute on each floor, but sometimes larger items needed to be taken to the basement facilities. The basement was deserted, lit by flickering fluorescence that created moving shadows in the corners. As I was depositing my rubbish, I noticed a door I hadn't seen before, partially hidden behind the recycling bins. It was unmarked except for a small black symbol that resembled a stylized eye or perhaps a keyhole. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tried the handle. To my surprise, it opened onto a stairwell I didn't recognize, narrower than the main stairs, with metal steps rather than concrete. Something about it felt wrong, private, not meant for residents, but I'd already come this far. I climbed the stairs, trying to minimize the metallic echoes of my footsteps. After what seemed like more flights than should have been necessary to reach the ground floor, I emerged into yet another corridor I didn't recognize. This one was utilitarian, almost industrial. Exposed pipes running along the ceiling, numbered doors with electronic card readers beside each one. I was disoriented, unsure what part of the building I was in. As I stood there debating whether to continue exploring or return the way I'd come, one of the doors opened further down the hallway. Instinctively, I ducked into an alcove, suddenly certain I wasn't supposed to be there. Through the narrow gap between the wall and a large electrical panel, I watched as two men exited the room. They were dressed casually, but carried themselves with a deliberate alertness that made me think of security personnel. One was speaking in hushed tones about resolution issues and frame rates, while the other nodded, checking something on a tablet. They walked past my hiding spot without noticing me, disappearing through a door at the end of the corridor. I waited several minutes before moving, heart pounding against my ribs. When I was certain they weren't returning, I crept toward the door they'd emerged from, driven by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The door had been left slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see what appeared to be a monitoring station. Multiple screens showing different rooms, each one meticulously furnished, but in vastly different styles. One looked like a vintage 1970s lounge, another like a sterile medical examination room, a third like a child's nursery, all empty, all waiting. On a desk beneath the screens sat several high-end cameras, lighting equipment, and what looked like a control panel with dozens of switches and dials. A laptop was open beside them, displaying what I recognized with a sudden chill as a dark web browser interface, similar to ones I'd seen in documentaries about internet crime. The screen showed a payment system, usernames, and viewing statistics for something called the Blackthorn Experience. I backed away, trying to process what I was seeing. It looked like some kind of broadcasting setup, but the secrecy, the dark web interface, it suggested something deeply illegal. I needed to leave, to pretend I'd never seen any of this. I turned to retrace my steps and found myself face to face with a woman I hadn't heard approach. She was impeccably dressed in what looked like an expensive business suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and asked if I was lost. Her tone was pleasant, but carried an undercurrent of steel. I mumbled something about taking a wrong turn while looking for the maintenance office, trying to mask my terror with confusion. At the stairwell door, she asked my flat number and name. I was too frightened to consider lying. She smiled again, thanked me for my understanding, and watched as I descended the stairs. I felt her eyes on my back long after I turned the corner. The next day, I received a letter under my door informing me of a rent decrease due to my valued resident status. It was a substantial reduction, enough to make me hesitate before acting on what I'd discovered. I told myself I needed time to think, to plan my next move carefully. That evening, I noticed a subtle change in my flat. Nothing I could definitively point to. Perhaps items moved slightly from where I'd left them, a different smell in the air, a sense that the space had been occupied in my absence. I began checking for hidden cameras, growing increasingly paranoid about being watched. I started researching Blackthorn Heights online, looking for anything unusual associated with the building. Most results were standard property listings and bland corporate information about the management company. But on the 7th page of search results, I found a single forum post from 3 years earlier. Someone claiming to be a former maintenance worker described accidentally discovering a studio setup in the building, and subsequently being offered a significant raise to forget what they'd seen. The post had no replies and had been made by a now deleted account. That night, unable to sleep, I stood at my window staring at the identical grid of windows across from mine. Most were dark at this hour, but I counted 11 that remained illuminated despite the late hour. As I watched, the lights in one flat suddenly brightened dramatically, as if powerful studio lights had been switched on. The blinds were open, allowing me to see directly inside. What I witnessed in that flat across the courtyard made me recoil from the window. My hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a scream. I won't describe it in detail. I'll just say that what occurred in that brightly lit space was being done by one person to another. It was clearly not consensual, and it ended with stillness, with absence of movement where movement should have been. When my hands stopped shaking enough to hold my phone, I dialed emergency services. I reported what I'd seen as clearly as I could, providing the building name and what I estimated to be the flat number based on its position. The operator assured me police would be dispatched immediately. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived at the building. I watched from my window as they entered, then waited anxiously for any sign of activity. After about 15 minutes, they emerged and returned to their car without any apparent urgency. No additional police arrived, no ambulances, no forensic teams. My phone rang an hour later. The caller ID showed only private number. It was the woman from the restricted area, her voice just as pleasantly chilling as before. She thanked me for my concern about my neighbor, but assured me the police had found nothing amiss. The flat in question was currently unoccupied according to their records. She suggested that the stress of city living sometimes played tricks on the mind, and reminded me of the mental health resources available to residents. Before ending the call, she mentioned how fortunate I was to have such an affordable flat in the current market. The threat was clear. I spent the remainder of the night researching other accommodation, preparing to leave first thing in the morning. But when I tried to access my bank account online, I found it temporarily frozen due to suspicious activity. My emails to my family and close friends about staying with them were bouncing back undelivered. When I tried to call out, my phone showed no service despite full signal bars. 3 days later, I remain in the flat, watching the windows across from mine with obsessive attention. I've documented everything I've observed. Lights activating in different flats at regular intervals, the same terrible scenes playing out in different rooms with different people. Always at night, always brightly lit, always ending the same way. I've come to understand that Blackthorn Heights isn't just a building. It's a carefully constructed broadcasting network. Each flat potentially a stage. Each resident either a knowing participant or an unwitting neighbor like myself. The dark website I glimpsed must be offering live streams of real murders to paying viewers around the world, each occurring in carefully designed sets that exist behind ordinary-looking doors in this very ordinary-looking building. Why am I telling you this now? Because last night, I saw them preparing the flat directly opposite mine, replacing the furniture, setting up additional lighting, positioning cameras behind ordinary-looking wall fixtures. This morning, I received another letter under my door, a notice about scheduled maintenance requiring access to my flat tomorrow evening, and a reminder of my special resident status and the importance of community cooperation. I'm typing this on my phone with the battery nearly dead. I've tried knocking on neighbors' doors, but no one answers. The main entrance is now staffed by security guards I don't recognize, who politely but firmly turn away any visitors. The lifts require key card access that my card no longer provides. limiting me to my floor and the lobby. If you're reading this, it means I found a way to get this message out. It means I'm probably no longer in a position to tell you what happened next. But if you ever find yourself being offered an unusually affordable flat in a high-rise where the residents keep to themselves, where certain floors seem to exist only sometimes, where the management is overly interested in your movements, run. Because somewhere right now, someone is watching a live stream from Blackthorn Heights. Someone is paying to watch what happens in these rooms. And tomorrow, someone will be watching my flat, waiting for the show to begin.